Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. There is also a link in the description to my Patreon. It has Naruto fanfiction that cannot be posted on YouTube. There is some free content on there. So, you don't have to be a paying member to enjoy listening to excellent fanfiction. Chapter 11: The Survivor. Naruto barged into Tazuna's kitchen the following morning while the rest of Team 7 was eating breakfast. All heads spun in his direction. It turned out Naruto also snuck out to train the previous night, and this was the first time his team had seen him since. His orange jacket and pants were covered in dirt, his hair was a mess, and he looked extremely disheveled. "Where have you been?" Kakashi asked nonchalantly, but the way his eyebrow arched told Sakura that he was concerned. "Guys, I don't know how to say this, but," Naruto started in, taking a very pronounced gulp. He anxiously ran a hand through his matted, blonde hair. Everyone stared expectantly. "So I met the most attractive boy ever last night." Sakura's jaw nearly hit the table and Sasuke turned away to spit out the tea he was sipping. Naruto, who seemed totally oblivious to his teammates' reactions, carried on with his story. "Like, attractive, he added, slightly breathlessly. "He was even prettier than Sakura-chan." He plopped himself down on the seat next to Sakura. "Am I ever confused now?" And after that comment, he sure wasn't the only confused one. Sakura shook her head and took a long sip from her own mug of tea. She had a hunch Naruto had an encounter with a maskless Haku. Haku, the ninja assassin who accompanied Zabuza, had feminine enough features that he frequently cross-dressed during his espionage missions. Kakashi set his own mug down. "Well, not that this story doesn't sound interesting," he said while rising to his feet, "but I'm going to pack my bag for our mission today." And then he stalked off, muttering something that sounded an awful lot like "never ceases to amaze me" under his breath. Then Naruto, who was oblivious to Sasuke and Sakura's dumbfounded expressions, beckoned for them to listen closely. "So don't tell Kakashi-sensei, but I snuck out to train in the middle of the night," he whispered with a mischievous grin. Sakura rolled her eyes. Everyone in the house was quite aware of Naruto's late-night escape after that dramatic entrance. "That's when I met the pretty guy. And man was I ever let down when I found out that she was a he. I thought it was my lucky night, if you know what I mean." Sasuke?" he added while nudging said teammate in the side and nearly causing him to spill his tea all over himself. "Watch it, dumbass," Sasuke said with a scowl, but his comment went unnoticed by the blonde. "What did you guys do last night, anyways?" Naruto, who was oblivious to Sasuke's death glare, asked Sakura. "I heard you both leave before me." Sakura started, but Sasuke interrupted her. "Nothing," he growled while putting his mug down with more force than he probably intended. Then Sasuke snatched up his empty plate and stormed over to the sink without another word, leaving his half-full mug behind. Naruto let out a low whistle. "Geez, what's got his panties in a knot?" he asked Sakura with wide eyes. She shrugged and focused very intently on the egg she was eating. Sasuke was relatively avoidant of his teammates for the rest of the day. In the morning, while they accompanied Tazuna as he worked away at the bridge with his crew, Sasuke claimed an area that was secluded from the other guarding posts. He barely spoke a word to the others, even to Kakashi when he asked Sasuke for a status report. At lunchtime, when Sakura expressed that she was going to check on her makeshift hospital in the village, Sasuke immediately volunteered to spend lunch at the bridge. Kakashi complied and sent Naruto to the medical tent with Sakura instead. "There's gotta be something huge up his ass today," Naruto said with a frown. "Normally he volunteers to go to the tent with you right away." Sakura smiled weakly. Yeah. She was certain now that something was bothering their dark-haired teammate. And the fact that his mood swing might be a product of their conversation the previous night angered Sakura a little. She was the one who had disclosed deeply personal information. She was the one who had possibly jeopardized her time travel mission by trusting him. So why the hell was he in such a bad mood? Because she might not be in love with him? Because he might not have her wrapped around his little finger like he thought he did? Please. That selfish, possessive moron. It was times like this that Sakura questioned how she managed to fall in love with him in the first place. Naruto spent the next night training so late that he nearly depleted all of his chakra and was physically incapable of waking up the following morning. Sakura, who was acutely aware that Zabuza could make a reappearance any day now, packed her weapon holster to the brim with weapons and medicinal ointments. She had also spent many hours contemplating persuading her team to avoid a battle with Zabuza altogether because, after all, it had no apparent relevance to her time travel mission and she knew they would barely make it out alive. But Sakura opted to keep her mouth shut for 4 reasons. 1. Her teammates would give her hell for asking them to back out. 2. She would rouse more suspicion in the mind of her ever-untrusting sensei if she tried to call the shots. 3. If Zabuza and Haku survived, they could complicate things in the long run. And 4. She wanted Gato dead. But as Sakura followed Kakashi, Sasuke, and Tazuna to the bridge that morning, she felt a hint of doubt. Because what if things were different this time? What if her newfound reputation in the village swayed the course of the battle somehow? What if Sasuke's unusual emotional state caused him to do something reckless? And with a pang of guilt, Sakura remembered that it was Sasuke who barely escaped death last time they faced off against Zabuza and Haku. She was marching her beloved teammate towards his defeat. This can't play out like last time. Sakura was realizing more than ever that traveling through time put her in a position of unfathomable power over the world around her. Her tiniest actions created a ripple effect that could change the outcome of just about any situation, including whether Sasuke would get out of this alive. I will need to stop Haku myself. And fast. If she didn't get to Haku in time, he would trap Sasuke and Naruto inside his crystal ice mirror's jutsu, which would inevitably lead to Sasuke sacrificing himself for Naruto and nearly dying. Although Naruto would later tap into the 9-tailed fox's chakra and wreak havoc on the battlefield, Team 7 would leave the fight with far too many near-fatal casualties. If only Sakura could find a way to prevent Haku from using that jutsu and stall Zabuza for a little while, Gato's army would eventually show up and finish them off anyways. That being said, they couldn't kill Zabuza. They needed him to stay alive just long enough to kill Gato and put an end to his tyranny over the Land of Waves. Because if any member of Team 7 killed Gato themselves, the act would be interpreted as Konoha warmongering. When the 4 of them arrived, Kakashi, Sasuke, Sakura, and Tazuna were greeted by the dead bodies of the bridge builder's crew scattered across the bridge. He cried out and Sakura's stomach gave an uncomfortable lurch because apparently the showdown with Zabuza would take place today. Tazuna motioned to run towards the corpses of his closest friends, but Kakashi held him back. Zabuza is here, he hissed as thick fog began to cloud their visions. He positioned himself in front of the bridge builder and instructed for Sasuke and Sakura to cover his back. Stay on guard. As you learned from our previous battle, Zabuza is trained in the art of silent killing and he won't hold back on any of us. He's here all right, Sakura thought with a grimace. Equally as dense and disorientating as the fog, Zabuza's chakra was suddenly everywhere, chilling Sakura to the bone. The bloodthirst was thick in the air and she couldn't stop the terror from welling up inside her. These enemies were, and always had been, so unreachably far out of her league. But Sakura needed to stop Haku. She needed to get a hold of herself and have faith that her team would pull through somehow. Quietly, she dipped her fingertips into her weapon pouch to hook them around the handles of 3 poison-laced kunai while pumping chakra to the soles of her feet. A haunting voice resounded through the mist. Welcome back, Tazuna. Kakashi, Zabuza's deep voice echoed across the bridge. It resounded from all directions and rumbled through the ground beneath their feet. I see you brought the troublesome brats with you again. Sakura gripped her knives tightly and sensed Sasuke's body seize up beside her. Even the sharpest eyes were rendered nearly blind in this fog. How could you do this, Kakashi? She heard Zabuza sneer. That boy is practically trembling with fear. Sakura cast a quick glance at her teammate who was visibly shaking. Sasuke? It was unnerving to see the proud Uchiha clan survivor plunge into an emotional spiral. Sakura gritted her teeth. Then they were surrounded by 15 identical Zabuza replicas. Water clones. Sasuke emitted a low growl. I'm not afraid, he bravely spat out. It's the opposite, I'm fired up for a rematch. Sakura smirked but didn't fail to catch the minuscule waver in her teammate's voice. He knows what we're up against. Sasuke's good, but against these guys. Patience, the clones hissed in unison before vanishing entirely in splashes of water. Kakashi, Tazuna, Sakura, and Sasuke all jumped with surprise as cold liquid pooled around their feet. Where did he go? What's his next move? There is a minor disturbance I must address first. And that was when he struck. Sakura's brain didn't process the soreness in her abdomen until she coughed and tasted blood. She emitted a straggled scream when the second blow made contact with her head. She felt herself collapse to the pavement as white-hot pain pulsed through her entire body. And then she was staring into a pair of blood-red eyes. The bridge was on fire. And then everything went black. Sakura's body roused before she opened her eyes. Her back was pressed against what felt like a cool, wet concrete surface, and something soft was touching her forehead. The air was heavy. And so were all the parts of her that weren't numb. She ventured to open her eyes a sliver. But she was met with an onslaught of fierce pangs reverberating through her skull. Damn it. Sakura had a head injury of some sort. This wasn't good. But she tried again because there was someone looming over her. And if that someone was an enemy, she was as good as dead being caught in a state like this. But it wasn't an enemy. It was Tazuna, and he was pressing a balled-up hunk of fabric to her forehead. And that was about all she could see through the thick mist surrounding them. That's right, mist. Sakura groaned. Where's Zabuza? She said, the words scratching the dry inner lining of her throat. Sakura? Said Tazuna, who jumped at the sound of her voice. You're alive? Alive? Of course she was alive. Why would he ask that? Where are the others? She asked while using every bit of her strength to prop herself up into a sitting position. But goodness, did her body ever ache. And come to think of it, how did her dress get so bloody? Sakura, don't move. These are your sensei's orders. If you lose any more blood, but Sakura promptly ignored him and motioned to rise to her feet. The world around her was spinning in and out of focus. But that's just the mist, isn't it? Where are the others? She repeated with more firmness as she started to regain focus. The last thing she remembered was preparing to engage in battle with Zabuza and Haku. But where were they now? Was she too late? Sakura, Kakashi told me to. I don't give a shit about his orders. Sakura yelled, practically shaking with fury. Or was it pain? She wasn't sure. Tell me now. Where is Haku? Tazuna seemed to give up his attempt to keep her still and also rose to his feet. He's dead, don't worry, he said, while pressing the cloth back to her forehead. Dead? Sakura echoed with a surge of horror. It was too late. Haku was dead, which meant that Sasuke was already dying. Sakura's legs moved instinctively, propelling her blindly through the fog. Sakura, wait. Tazuna called and jogging to keep up with her. You got hit in the head and in the stomach. You are in no condition to join the fight, the large man wheezed. And then, right on cue, Sakura coughed and more blood spilled from her mouth and splattered on the ground. She frowned. Zabuza's strikes must have done some damage after all. I'll be fine, she said while pressing her hand to her stomach and feeling her medical chakra flicker to life in her palm. I'll heal myself enough to move. Where's Sasuke's body? She caught Tazuna's look of bewilderment out of the corner of her eye as her legs carried her through the mist. Body? I don't know what you mean. I'd presume Sasuke is still fighting Zabuza with the others. Sakura stopped dead in her tracks. What? She asked, shock laced in her tone. What do you mean he's fighting? Tazuna's expression became increasingly perplexed. Well, I mean, the fight with Haku probably took a lot out of him, but I don't think he'd leave the others to deal with Zabuza on their own. Oh, and Naruto got here just after Haku was defeated. Wait. Naruto never fought Haku? Sakura's mind was racing. I don't understand, she said. Haku was supposed to kill Sasuke. Tazuna shook his head. No, you have it mixed up, he said. Sasuke killed Haku. Sakura wasn't sure how she was physically capable, but she was sprinting like a madman through the fog. Her head was spinning and just about every inch of her body was throbbing with pain, but she needed to find her team. She needed answers. To see the outcome with her own two eyes. As she ran, Tazuna filled her in on the events she missed. Zabuza attacked her first, likely to cut off the team's supply of medical support, and everyone thought she was dead. Sasuke went berserk and made to launch his own attack on Zabuza, but Haku stepped in, and from there, a battle between the young prodigies ensued. By the time Naruto showed up, Haku was already dead, and that was when Kakashi ordered Tazuna to bring Sakura's body as far away from the battle as possible. Tracking their chakra signatures, Sakura managed to locate her teammates a short while after. She and Tazuna looked on from about 50 meters away, and yes, just how she remembered it, there was Kakashi, engaged in a close combat fight with Zabuza. But then, a flash of orange? Naruto was there too this time, barraging the demon with his shadow clones. And if Tazuna was right about Naruto joining in on Kakashi's fight, then what about Haku? And what about... Sakura's heart leapt when she caught sight of her dark-haired teammate springing into the air and firing a handful of weapons at the enemy. He was alive. But Sakura couldn't help noticing that he was moving rather slowly. And that his chakra levels were so dangerously low that she could hardly sense them. His limbs were dotted with puncture wounds and bruises, and he was fighting from a much greater distance than the others. Zabuza himself appeared to be struggling. His arms were incapacitated by kunai piercing just the right muscles in his biceps, rendering his monstrous sword unusable, which gave Team 7 a significant advantage. To her far right, a dark mass was piled on the ground. Sakura squinted her eyes through the mist. Could that be Haku? Alright, Naruto now. Kakashi then shouted. Naruto's clones sprang into action by surrounding the demon and taking hold of his arms and legs to secure him in place. Kakashi crouched into a low battle stance and pulled his hands together to form seals for a jutsu. Within seconds, a familiar ear-splitting chirping met Sakura's ears and an electric blue light emerged in Kakashi's palm. It was a Chidori Kakashi's signature lightning-style attack that transformed his hand into an impenetrable blade of concentrated electricity. It quickly dawned on Sakura what this move implied. This would be the last blow. And Haku wasn't alive to get in the way this time. Zabuza was about to die. Which meant that Gato would live. Stop! Sakura cried before she could restrain herself and while ignoring Tazuna's shouts of protest. She pushed past the bridge builder and raced towards the others with every ounce of strength she had left. Sasuke, who was crouched with his back facing her, was alerted to her presence first, but Sakura couldn't afford to pay him any mind because Kakashi hadn't noticed her yet. He was still too far away. His Chidori was at full capacity, the chirping and crackling was growing louder and louder, and his eyes were trained on his target. And then Kakashi started to move, his lightning blade making its steady descent towards Zabuza's heart. Sakura's body acted on its own. She loaded her fists with all the chakra she could muster, and she was thrusting them into the bridge's surface before she could fully process her actions. She directed the force of her punch toward Kakashi, and a trail of explosions shot outwards from her fists along the bridge's surface, blasting the concrete to pieces. As planned, Kakashi was thrown off course when the ground beneath him started to crumble, forcing him to spring backwards and away from Zabuza. Naruto's clones disappeared, leaving behind only the real Naruto clinging to Zabuza's left arm, and Sasuke was thrown backwards onto the ground from the sheer force of Sakura's attack. All heads spun in her direction with expressions of utter shock. Naruto was the first to speak. Sakura-chan. You're alive? He cried. Not for long. It seemed that Naruto had slackened his grip on Zabuza's arm, and combined with the absence of his clones, the demon broke free. Before Sakura knew it, he was directly before her and aiming a chakra-enhanced kick at her hardly healed abdomen. Shit, Sakura thought in horror. She didn't have any time to defend herself. He was too fast and her body was too weak to move. She crossed her arms over her torso in a fruitless attempt to block his kick and squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the impact. But it didn't come. Well, not the impact she was expecting at least. Something slammed into Sakura, square in the chest with a force that nearly sent her collapsing backwards. A body. She steadied herself and gained her bearings, only to find a pair of Sharingan glaring at her. No. Sasuke had taken the blow and it got him square in the back. What are you doing? He hissed through clenched teeth, and as quickly as they appeared, his red irises flickered and reverted to their usual shade of black. Sakura took one proper look at her teammate's face and felt her stomach churn. Sasuke's skin was ghostly white, smeared with blood, and his eyes were glazed over with complete exhaustion. His chakra reserves were almost entirely depleted. He stirred when Zabuza spoke next. Haven't had enough yet, Uchiha? The demon growled and coiling his leg to strike again. The briefest trace of fear flashed in Sasuke's dark, bloodshot eyes. Because he was defenseless and with the right release of chakra, Zabuza was in a prime position to kill him. No. Sakura was frozen as Zabuza lunged towards them at an unstoppable speed, his dark chakra blazing. Sasuke ducked his head and squeezed his eyes shut, bracing himself for a fatal blow. A sickening snap resounded. They were in a vortex of red chakra. Sakura's head snapped up. She knew this chakra, and instinctively, her body seized. Naruto was standing between Sasuke and Zabuza and gripping Zabuza's poised leg. The demon held in pain as Naruto clawed his taloned hand even more tightly around his opponent's broken calf. Then, with a mighty roar, Naruto launched Zabuza into the air. The demon collided into the rail of the bridge with a crash. Naruto! Sakura cried, trembling, and taking a step in front of Sasuke, who was gaping at his blonde teammate. Naruto turned in response to Sakura's voice. The eyes of the nine-tailed fox bore into hers. Naruto emitted a low growl and Sakura's blood ran cold, but she didn't have time to process her fear because Zabuza had reappeared, reverting Naruto's focus back to his enemy. Kakashi also emerged from the mist with a kunai in hand, and he launched himself at Zabuza. Naruto lowered to all fours in a cloak of red chakra, preparing to pounce at the two ninjas battling before him. With a surge of panic, Sakura realized that in this state, he wouldn't distinguish between Kakashi and Zabuza. She could feel the nine-tails' bloodlust radiating through the air. He was going to attack whoever crossed his path. Naruto, stop! She cried and extending her hand towards him. Naruto whirled around, his fangs bared, and recklessly swung his clawed hand to silence her. Everything went black for the second time. What's the verdict? She'll live. I suspect she'll be awake any day now. Thank you. If it wasn't for your hard work, we might have lost her. Well, we wouldn't be here without her. She saved her own life, really. Sakura creaked her eyes open. Two figures were standing at the foot of the small bed she was lying in. They were engulfed in whiteness. Her eyelids snapped apart. White. Is that Zabuza's mist? But no, it wasn't. She was in what appeared to be a tiny hospital room surrounded by white curtains. And she knew the figures at the end of her bed. They weren't enemies. Kakashi-sensei? She said weakly and motioning to sit up, only to realize that she physically couldn't. Her body was drained of energy and covered in bandages, and her arm was hooked up to an 4. Kakashi turned to face her. Oh, you're up, he observed and approaching the bedside. The medic he was speaking to beamed. Sakura-sama. I'm so glad to see you awake. I'll go inform the others, she said before vanishing through the white curtains. Where are the others? Sakura croaked and gazing up at her sensei once they were alone. She was feeling extremely lightheaded. Naruto and Sasuke are fine, Kakashi said, and easing himself into the chair beside her bed. She nodded slowly. And Gato? Dead, Kakashi confirmed curtly. Sakura felt relief wash over her. After he hurt you, Naruto came back to his senses. But before we could make another move on Zabuza, Gato's army showed up. Zabuza killed him and he died of his own injuries shortly after. He pulled out his orange book and leaned back into the chair. The enemies are gone. Go to sleep, he added bluntly. This is exactly what I hoped would happen. Sakura eased herself back into the bed. Yes, she breathed, and graciously taking up his offer. When Sakura roused again, she was feeling immensely better. Her back was propped up this time, and both the bandages and the four had been removed. She gazed around the small, empty room and realized that she must be in her own makeshift hospital. Where did they get the IVs from? And when did they get curtains? The place was getting quite sophisticated. That was when Sasuke walked in her room through a small slit in the curtains. His eyes immediately widened when they met hers, and Sakura felt her stomach give a lurch. Looks like you really did make it out okay. For a fleeting moment, his expression relaxed. And then something snapped. In a heartbeat, Sasuke was towering over her, his hands balled into fists and his Sharingan whirring to life. What the hell were you thinking? He spat. Sakura's back instinctively pressed into the hospital bed, and as old memories resurfaced, she half expected him to curl his fingers around her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The black markings on Sasuke's red irises were spinning wildly. Why did you interfere? He practically growled. She opened her mouth again. But all she could muster up was, your eyes. Sasuke blinked down at her for a moment before sighing heavily and dropping onto the chair at her bedside. He put his head in his hands. Yeah. I finally figured out how to use these, he mumbled without looking up. Sakura watched him and bristled with pride in spite of everything. Because the abilities that came with the Uchiha clan's revered Sharingan were formidable. Those eyes would allow Sasuke to visualize opponents' attacks before they happened and craft unmatched genjutsus. Sakura also knew that Sharingan tended to surface in its users when they were experiencing intense distress. Which meant that, right now. She bit her lip. I'm sorry. I understand that what I did on the bridge was reckless, and I didn't mean. But Sasuke cut her apology short. You don't understand what it means if you died, he said quietly into his hands. Sakura blanched. What? She said slowly, and then it hit her like the crash of a monstrous ocean wave. If she died, the time travel mission was over. And Tsunade specifically told Sakura that she needed to stay alive until 3 days before her 18th birthday, or else the world would revert to its former state. A state of chaos and destruction. A world where Sasuke wasn't saved, Orochimaru was at large, and the fate of the Leaf Village was annihilation. What the hell was she thinking? Tears formed in the corners of her eyes, and before Sakura could get a hold of herself, she let out a tiny sob. Sasuke's head jerked up with surprise. Wait, stop, he said, and turning around in the chair to face her. But she couldn't stop, and tears were spilling from her lower eyelids and trickling down her cheeks. Stop crying, Sasuke ordered again, traces of panic appearing in his voice. He wasn't particularly good at comforting people, and the sight of his teammates' tears seemed to offset him. He hastily dragged the back of his index finger over her cheek to wipe off a tear. It's fine. You're alive. Sakura opened her mouth to choke out some words of reassurance, but that was when Naruto burst in through the curtains. Sakura-chan. He wailed, and making a beeline for her bed. I'm sorry. And next thing she knew, Naruto's arms were wrapped around her shoulders and he was crushing her into the bed. I'm so sorry. Get off, dumbass, Sasuke snapped. She can't breathe. Oh right. Naruto stammered through enormous sobs before releasing her. He was crying even harder than Sakura was. It's all right, Naruto, she said, and smiling up at him as well as she could. It wasn't your fault. And she knew it wasn't. Naruto had injured her countless times in the nine-tailed fox's form. She was used to it. I'm sorry, he said again and gripping her hand so tightly that it hurt. So many things happened and I need to tell you guys something. Sakura and Sasuke looked up. What is it? Sasuke asked. Naruto took a deep breath and what he said next made Sakura forget the pain in her hand entirely. Haku lived. Chapter 12 Striking a Deal. 2 days upon Team 7's return to Konoha, Sakura found herself in an enormous lab on the upper floors of the village's hospital gathering the medical supplies for a hysterectomy. Only minutes prior, Sakura had been informed that a middle-aged female villager was found to have uterine fibroids causing internal bleeding beyond the repair of medical ninjutsu. Her uterus needed to be removed lest her life be in jeopardy. Now the real question is how Sakura ended up preparing for such a complicated procedure in the first place. Well, once Sakura's wounds healed, Team 7's mission in the Land of Waves came to a close. After an informal burial was held for Zabuza, Tazuna announced that he would name his bridge after the village's heroes Team 7. And after what they'd gone through for a mission they were only paid B-ranked mission wages for, they deserved it. In addition to sparking bravery among the Land of Waves citizens to stand up to Gato, eliminating a dangerous, rogue mercenary, and ensuring that the bridge connecting the land to neighboring nations was constructed safely, a certain member of Team 7 also single-handedly revolutionized the nation's healthcare system. Bridge 7, Tazuna had said thoughtfully amidst their final farewells. It has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Sakura smiled to herself while she polished a knife for the surgery. It certainly did. As it turned out, personnel at the hospital in Konoha seemed to know of her pink medic reputation before she even showed up for her volunteer shift that morning. Promptly, Sakura was escorted to a small office and instructed to write a particularly challenging exam that entry-level medics were required to take. Despite the short notice and lack of resources she had to study from, Sakura aced it. She not only wrote this exam but was also responsible for evaluating incoming medics' responses to this very test in her former life. Sakura's examiners were stunned by her flawless test score and agreed that she was entitled to an enormous promotion. However, there were a few notable limitations. First, she didn't have enough experience to work as a medic, or so it seemed, and she was only available to work part-time due to her ninja training. So what was agreed upon was that Sakura would work in a paid role as a doctor's personal assistant. And she really couldn't complain about the opportunity. After spending weeks filing documents for free, being offered a salary and a chance to work in an environment where she might enhance her medical ninjutsu was a huge upgrade. Finally, she would get a chance to network with superiors, access the hospital's textual resources, and earn more money to expand her personal stockpile of weapons and medical supplies. Alas, after lunch on the day she wrote the exam, Sakura was positioned under the supervision of a doctor named Iam and instructed to help her with an upcoming procedure, a hysterectomy. For now, Sakura's recent concerns over having a growing reputation were on the back burner. Because things were looking pretty good since the mission in the Land of Waves. And what became of Haku? Sakura saw him once, only briefly, while he was being patched up in her makeshift hospital after the battle. He was tried immediately afterwards and, according to Naruto, was released on the conditions that he completed a few months of community service work and that his future activity was monitored. He obliged to the arrangement graciously. Sakura couldn't help wondering if Haku's survival would change the course of events. Surely it would somehow. But, as Kakashi had said after Sasuke voiced his own concerns about the masked boy roaming free, Haku isn't an enemy anymore. Tazuna is our client and he's convinced the boy isn't a threat, so our services are no longer needed. And, of course, Kakashi was right. It would be foolish to chastise Haku further. Meddling in the Land of Waves' internal affairs without warrant could even spark international conflict. So whether or not Haku surviving was a good thing, for now, it wasn't Sakura's problem. When Sakura arrived home after the mission, she was relieved to find that the time travel scroll was safe and sound in her underwear drawer and that the transformation jutsu she put on it ages ago was still holding. She examined the scroll carefully for any indication that it had been tampered with while she was away. It passed her inspection. None of the traps Sasuke laid out in her room had been set off either. She exhaled deeply with relief and folded the lacy red underwear back into the drawer. After her morning shower on the third day back in the village, Sakura paused before her body-length mirror after she'd pulled on her signature black shorts and red training dress with slits down the side. Her body was leaner and notably more toned than it was a month ago when she started her new life. It was still much smaller than it used to be, naturally, and less curvy too, she noted, but she didn't look as much like a scrawny twig. She smiled at her reflection. "Let's keep this up," she mumbled to herself. "And soon we'll be stronger than I was when I was older." She chuckled softly at how ridiculous the statement sounded before slipping on her head protector, grabbing her weapon pouch, backpack, and wallet, and setting out for the academy. Only 9 academy students in Sakura's year graduated to become full-fledged ninjas. The 9, commonly referred to as the Rookie 9 among their seniors, consisted of teams 7, 8, and 10. And for the first time since their graduation a month ago, the group would assemble at the academy today to write progress reports. When Sakura entered the classroom, one member from each team was already there. Shikamaru Nara, the lazy genius from Team 10, had his feet propped up on his desk near the door and appeared to be napping. He was wearing his default unimpressed look, with his long nose crinkled and his lips pulled into a frown, and his long, brown hair was tied in a tight ponytail at the crown of his head. Without question, he was only here so early because his mother forced him to be. If it were up to him, he'd spend his days watching clouds and playing board games. Having such a high IQ must be tiring indeed, Sakura thought. Hinata Hyuga from Team 8 was sitting quietly in the middle of the classroom with her hands clasped together. The fidgety girl with a black bob cut and powder white skin was wearing a signature beige sweater with her forehead protector loosely tied around her neck. Sakura returned Hinata's shy wave with a smile as she passed by. Hinata was such a sweet, gentle girl whom many doubted would ever make a good ninja. However, given the unique abilities she had acquired from what was arguably the second most elite clan in Konoha, after the Uchiha clan, and the raging perseverance that lurked within her, Sakura knew otherwise. And at the desk nearest the window sat Sasuke Uchiha of Team 7. He was usually quite punctual, so it was no surprise to find him in the classroom early. He probably didn't have much else to do, Sakura figured, since he lived alone and his hobbies consisted of training and more training. Sasuke was gazing out at the academy grounds with a characteristically serious expression planted on his face and a faraway look in his dark eyes. When he sensed Sakura approach the desk, he nodded in greeting and shifted along the bench so she could sit beside him. Sakura took her seat and cast her teammate a sideways glance. They hadn't interacted one-on-one since their strange exchange in the hospital after their battle with Zabuza. She never properly thanked him for sacrificing himself for her, and he never explained his mysterious hissy fit, that Sakura was sure had to do with him thinking she was in love with someone else. Sakura sucked in a breath. "Good morning," she tried politely while pulling a notebook out of her bag and placing it on her desk. "Morning," Sasuke grunted without pulling his eyes away from the window. He didn't seem to be in a talking mood. Sakura fiddled with her writing utensils while trying to think of what to say next when she noticed that Shino had slipped in unnoticed and was sitting next to Hinata at teammate's desk. That guy had to be the weirdest of the rookies, and not only because his specialty was controlling bugs. The bespectacled, thin genin with thick brown hair and a collar that covered the lower half of his face communicated with others even less than Sasuke did and had a strange way of making himself almost entirely unnoticeable. Sakura's eyes drifted towards the door just as Ino entered the room. The platinum blonde's head was held high, her charismatic demeanor practically radiating through the room upon her entry. Until her eyes landed on Sakura's, that is. Ino shot a seething glare at Team 7's desk through icy, blue eyes before turning her head away and taking her seat next to the napping Shikamaru. Sakura's stomach gave an uncomfortable lurch at her friend's cold behavior. And it didn't take her long to realize why Ino was acting like this. The last time they'd seen each other, she'd interrupted Sakura hugging Sasuke in front of the hospital in thanks for his surprise gifts. Sakura groaned and rubbed her temples. I don't have time for this, she thought, and wondering how girls, including her former self, could be so petty. She needed to fix her friendship with Ino. And fast. After all, Sakura's supply of medical herbs was running low and Ino was her only source. Casting a disgruntled glance at her black-haired teammate, Sakura decided that she would prove to her friend that nothing was going on between her and Sasuke. She needed to if she was to salvage whatever was left of their rocky friendship. Instinctively, Sakura shifted a few inches away from Sasuke along the bench. He didn't seem to notice. Choji walked in next, holding a bag of chips. The round, brunette boy was smiling, with chip crumbs smeared across his chin, as he trotted towards the desks. He greeted his teammates and seemed oblivious that one was fast asleep and the other was glaring daggers at the wall. Now nearly everyone was here. That only left. Get back here, you cheating dirtbag. The two loudest members of Rookie 9, Kiba Inuzuka from Team 8, and of course, Naruto Uzumaki from Team 7. Ino was a close third on a scale of loudness, but Naruto always took the cake. Said orange-clad blonde came flying through the door moments later with Kiba close on his heels. I win! Naruto exclaimed while punching a celebratory fist into the air and skipping over to his desk. Kiba, dressed in a signature fur-lined jacket, with his small, white dog, Akamaru, peeking out near the collar, folded his arms and scowled. Fat chance, he snapped, his pointed canines flashing and dark eyes narrowing. You pinned me to the ground with a clone to get a head start. I demand a rematch. I decline, Naruto beamed while taking his seat next to Sakura. Just accept defeat, dog breath. Kiba looked furious. He brandished an accusatory finger at Team 7's desk and bellowed, you just think you're all high and mighty because your team got a bridge named after it. Pfft. We all know you guys are nothing special. A bitterness had crept into his voice that made Sakura tense. Now Kiba was looking around at the other members of Team 8 and 10 for support. The only support he seemed to get, however, was from Ino, who was sneering. The others, save Shikamaru, glanced in their direction. Naruto climbed up onto the table. Oh yeah? He retorted at the top of his lungs. I think you guys just can't handle the fact that we're better than, but Naruto couldn't finish his thought because Sakura clamped a hand over his mouth and pulled him into a headlock. Shut up, Naruto. She hissed and dragging him back down to his seat. The last thing she needed was for the rest of Rookie 9 to turn against her team. Sure, they were a bunch of goofballs now, but Sakura knew that in a few years' time, they would all be vital allies. And she couldn't afford to jeopardize that. Especially with her and Ino already being on shaky ground. Why should I? Naruto asked her with a pout. If he's got a problem with our team, I'll teach him a lesson. Sakura rubbed her temples and shot a pleading look at Sasuke only to find that he was determinedly staring out the window, clearly wanting nothing to do with this exchange. I really can't blame him. Because if you're quiet enough, I'll treat you to ramen after this, she said hurriedly. And, as anticipated, at her mention of Naruto's favorite R word, everything changed. Ramen? He repeated, his expression softening into something rather dreamy. That would be nice, Sakura-chan. Thanks. And, just like that, all thoughts of Kiba were momentarily erased from his mind. Sakura sighed with relief, thankful that her blonde teammate was rather predictable at this age. Because being on good terms with the other rookies was in her best interest. They all had uniquely advantageous abilities and, if she needed help executing her revenge, they were more likely to listen to her than the adults of the village. Shortly after, Iruka walked into the room, ushered Kiba to his seat, and started distributing the progress reports. Naruto finished answering his progress report first, Sakura suspected because his answers were incomplete. He waited outside of the classroom until Sakura finished hers too. So, still up for ramen? He asked excitedly, practically bouncing up and down on the balls of his feet. Sure, Sakura answered with a smile. She honestly missed spending time with her dear friend. Despite this young version of Naruto being, well, more of a handful than the older Naruto, she genuinely enjoyed his energetic presence. Sakura also had a hunch that her teammate still felt bad about hurting her in his Nine-Tails form, and she wanted to prove to him that he had her complete trust. Sakura was actually intending to ask Sasuke to tag along, but he finished his progress report before she did and left the room without backwards glance. Once they took their seats at the bar in Ichiraku and placed their orders, Naruto said, "I swear I've wanted to have lunch with you for years. Who would have guessed that I just needed to fight with Kiba for you to agree? Maybe I should do that more often." A cheeky grin sprouted on his lips. "No, you shouldn't," Sakura snapped. "Look, Naruto, I know he's a little loud and competitive, but that doesn't mean Kiba is a bad person. Appearances can be deceiving, you know." Naruto seemed to be in deep contemplation. "You're onto something, Sakura-chan," he mused. "I mean, look at that Haku guy. He came off like an evil criminal, but once we got talking, I realized that if we'd met any other way, we could have been really good friends." He smiled into the distance for a moment before turning back to Sakura with a mischievous look in his eye. "Want me to let you in on a secret?" he added, and peering around for eavesdroppers for dramatic effect. "Haku is my pen pal now." Sakura raised her eyebrows. "Really?" "Oh yeah," Naruto said, evidently pleased with himself. "I mean, I've only sent him one letter so far, but he said he'll update me on how things are going in the Land of Waves. Do you think you could keep me in the loop?" Sakura asked. She tried to pull off a look of mild interest while inwardly bubbling over with curiosity. It would be interesting to learn what changes stemmed from the altered battle outcome. Naruto said, and scrunching up his face in contemplation while their hot bowls of ramen were set down on the counter. "Maybe," he drawled in his usual sneaky manner, "but only if you treat me to ramen more often." Sakura shook her head, her mouth too full of ramen to retort. "You know," Naruto added thoughtfully between loud slurps, his voice lowering to a serious, matter-of-fact tone. "That's how you make good relationships with people. You buy them stuff." Sakura was about to make a comment about how he had never offered to buy her anything when her mind drifted to her other blonde friend. The one who she was certain hated her guts right now. Maybe that's what it would take to make amends with Ino to buy her something. But, what? A gift? A token of apology? But what would Ino want? And what was Sakura really apologizing for in the first place? She frowned at her bowl. Regardless, she vowed to pay a visit to the flower shop right after lunch. Her conversations with Naruto during the meal were light-hearted and a little nostalgia-inducing. A few months ago, in fact, Sakura had grabbed lunch with a taller, smarter version of this same guy, and as expected, on both occasions, he found plenty of things to whine about. And today, Naruto's complaint subject of choice was the progress report he just wrote. Honestly though, that one question about goals and directions? What was that all about? Sakura sighed. Question 16. With the goals you listed for question 15 in mind, describe the direction you should take in your personal training, she recited. It's not that hard, Naruto. Like if your goal is to improve your taijutsu, just list the drills you'll practice. Naruto was staring blankly at her. Whoa! He exclaimed with startling enthusiasm. As if you recited that exact question from memory. Do you have a super brain or something? He chuckled to himself before taking another huge slurp of noodles. Well, I guess I got that question wrong, he mumbled. I wrote left. But Sakura's mind was trained on his first comment. A super brain? Well, I suppose I've always had top marks at. And then it hit her. Her brain. Acing the medical exam at the hospital. Her photographic memory of the progress report. Time travel. How didn't she think of this before? What did happen to her brain when she traveled through time? Through her years of medical studies, Sakura had done extensive research in neuroanatomy. And one of the ground rules of the discipline was neuroplasticity, the notion that the brain changes shape over time. Well, more specifically, as a person ages and acquires knowledge, the brain gains new folds and wrinkles, allowing it to make complex connections it hadn't been able to previously. So as one learns, their brain changes physically. Sakura's mind was reeling. So, what brain did she have? The brain of a young teenager or the brain of an old teenager? Brains were physical, like any other part of the body, and Sakura's body was, quite evidently, currently that of young teenager. Then why did she ace the medical exam that morning? Sakura still had her older teenager mind and memory, she was certain of it. Did that mean her brain defied the physical properties of time travel? Then again, was time travel only physical? And if it wasn't, then what? Sakura-chan? Sakura was pulled back to the present with a lurch only to find that someone new had arrived on the scene. Is it okay if Hinata joins us? Naruto asked with a huge smile. Hi, Sakura-san, the girl said shyly from her seat next to Naruto and tucking a stray strand of her short, black hair behind her ear. Hinata's face was a fiery shade of red, showcasing her monstrous crush on a certain foxy blonde boy, who was completely oblivious to her feelings. I don't want to intrude, but I'm just here to apologize for Kiba's behavior today. It took Sakura a moment to remember what she was referring to. Oh. It's fine. Don't worry about it, Hinata, Sakura said with a smile, but she was struggling to focus. She was feeling quite lightheaded. Please join us for lunch, Hinata-chan. Naruto offered and patting the seat beside him. It's Sakura's treat. Sakura seconded Naruto's claim after rolling her eyes, and from there, it didn't take much persuading for Hinata to take up the offer. Sakura was trapped in a thought spiral for the rest of lunch and dismissed herself a little early, explaining to the others that she was probably coming down with something. She left a wad of money on the counter to pay for all 3 meals, which, in retrospect, would be better spent on weapons, and left the restaurant in a daze. Right when her life was starting to make sense, this new realization had to find its way to the forefront of her mind. What did it mean if she had an older brain in a younger body? Did it mean her brain would continue to evolve with time, making her smarter than she was in her past life? Or was her brain frozen like this? Or had she just underestimated how intelligent her younger brain was? Sakura felt a headache come on. Man, I would give an arm and a leg to get my hands on an MRI machine right about now. Even though she was working at the hospital, only technicians and highly skilled medics had access to the expensive machines in the radiation wing. We need to talk. A voice entered Sakura's consciousness. She froze in place and after a moment, realized that someone was standing near the building she was walking past. She turned towards the voice and there was Sasuke, leaning against the brick wall with his arms folded across his chest. His eyebrow was arched and he had an impassively cool expression plastered on his face. And yes, he looked cool all right. Rather attractive too, in Sakura's opinion. But, what kind of attraction is this? Was it mental attraction? Emotional? Sexual? Because sexual attraction required the activation of certain hormones. And hormones were produced in the brain. Then, was Sakura capable of feeling physically attracted to Sasuke right now, in this body and with this brain? And if not, why did the mere sight of him set her autonomic responses on overdrive and fill her stomach with butterflies? Were these responses coming from something beyond the physical realm? Her head was throbbing now. I think I'm going crazy. Wait, hold that thought. He just said something, didn't he? You want to talk? Sakura repeated and shaking her head in attempt to ward off her hyper-analytical train of thought. Sasuke nodded curtly while shooting her a look that said I'm not going to repeat myself, idiot. Are you free right now? He asked. Sakura stared at him. Because if he were anyone but Sasuke Uchiha, she might have wondered if he was asking her out. But being the highly unordinary individual he was, Sakura knew this had to be about something else. And was she free right now? Where am I going again? I'm heading to the flower shop, she said as she remembered her pledge to visit Ino. Alright, Sasuke said, his expression indifferent. So you're free. Let's go. And next thing she knew, Sakura was being dragged along the road by her wrist. Wait. She spluttered in confusion. What's this all about? Where are we going? Somewhere private, he answered over his shoulder without loosening his grip, as if she would run away if he did. Eventually, Sakura regained her footing and managed to stride alongside him. She cast Sasuke a confused glance, but he was determinedly staring straight ahead of them and didn't seem interested in elaborating. Several minutes later, Sakura was standing in the entrance of Sasuke's flat. Well, that's where I think I am, she thought with a grimace and scanning the plain-looking hallway carefully. Sasuke finally released her wrist and beckoned for her to follow him into a small, simple kitchen. Sit, he instructed, and nodding towards one of the chairs at the table. Hesitantly, Sakura slipped off her shoes and obeyed while wondering if she was currently being abducted by an imposter. Actually, that's not even a stretch of the imagination. But before Sakura could demand who the hell he was, Sasuke spoke again. Tea? He asked a little awkwardly while removing his forehead protector and running a hand through his matted hair. He raised his eyebrows in Sakura's direction when she didn't respond. Oh, she said, and blinking with surprise while easing herself onto one of the chairs. Sure, I guess. Sasuke nodded and moved towards the kitchen counters. Well, at this point, Sakura was certain of one thing: Sasuke lived here. It was funny how Sakura had never set foot in this flat before. Not once in her former life had Sasuke invited her over. But Sakura wasn't ruling the imposter scenario out quite yet, so she began scanning her surroundings for escape routes. However, the more her eyes wandered, the more she took note of things that had no relevance to an escape. Sasuke's flat looked extremely tidy. But perhaps that had more to do with how empty it was. His living room, which was visible across the hall, had nothing more than the bare essentials: a couch, a shelf, a window. The same could be said for his kitchen. And aside from a single picture frame on the living room shelf, Sasuke clearly took no interest in unessential furnishings. Sakura frowned towards the living room and wondered how much time Sasuke even spent in this boring, empty place. He preferred isolating himself from his peers, but he'd been living completely alone since he was 8 years old when his family was killed. Surely, if he really liked living here on his own, he would have made an effort to make it look less like a prison cell. Sakura jumped at the sound of Sasuke setting mugs down on the table. She spun in his direction, only to find that he was watching her curiously, clearly having caught her assessing his living quarters. She swallowed before hurriedly saying, "So, what's going on?" To change the topic. Right, he said, and taking the seat opposite her. Sasuke rested his elbows on the table and surveyed her over his clasped fingers. I need to talk to you about something. Sakura remained silent, prompting Sasuke to continue, but he was hesitating for some reason. What's he waiting for? Sasuke was normally quite blunt and direct with his inquiries. And then, finally. I know what's in that drawer. That drawer. Hold it. He doesn't mean. What drawer? Sakura asked dumbly and pretending she had no idea what he was talking about. Because he just couldn't mean the drawer she was hiding the time travel scroll in. Or could he? The drawer in your bedroom, he said, and averting his gaze. The one you asked me to set extra traps around. Oh God. He knows. Sakura began to panic. She must have spilled too much about her time travel mission after their pinecone fight. She knew she should have held her tongue. Now he knew everything, and her mission was as good as. Wait. But maybe he didn't know what the scroll was? Sakura gulped and put on the most collected face she could muster up. What exactly did you find in that drawer? She asked, emulating a professional tone. This was not a time to lose her composure. Maybe he was trying to get her to admit what the scroll was because he hadn't figured it out. But to her surprise, Sasuke averted his eyes even further away from her, his face flushing. Look, Sakura, he growled. When you told me you had a stalker, I didn't know it was like that. Why didn't you say anything? Say anything? She echoed, perplexed and noticing how his eyebrows were scrunched with worry. What did he find? Oh. Wait. Sakura suddenly realized exactly what Sasuke found in her drawer. Exactly what was in her drawer. My underwear. Which meant that he thought her stalker was. You think I have a sexual predator after me, Sakura breathed, her jaw slowly dropping at the unanticipated turn of events. Sasuke didn't acknowledge her comment. Rather, he stood up and began pacing back and forth with his hands clasped behind his back. Sakura took his lack of objection as a yes. Yes, Sasuke did think Sakura had a sexual predator after her. I didn't realize it was this serious, he said, amidst his pacing. And since your significant other isn't around, I'll help you get rid of the stalker in his absence. The wheels were turning slowly in Sakura's head. He must be referring to the person who she said she was in love with, who was, in fact, his future self. I don't have a significant other, Sasuke, she said quickly and frowning in his direction. He stopped his pacing. Well, whatever you call him, Sasuke elaborated flatly. Unless he's the stalker. Sakura rose to her feet with a surge of unplaced anger. No. I can assure you that he has no interest in me. He left, he tried to kill me, and he's never coming back. She spat, her voice rising. Sasuke glanced at his teammate and raised his eyebrows. He sounds like an asshole, he mumbled, traces of disgust written in his features. Sakura resisted the untimely urge to snort. Because if only he knew who he was talking about. Anyways, Sasuke continued as if she'd never interrupted him. Sakura lowered back into her chair. I'm going to help you capture your stalker. Sakura blinked. Wait, hold it, she said. The traps are just precautionary. There might not even be anyone after me at all. And it was true. Sakura just had a terrible hunch. But she was met with a disbelieving glare. Whether or not you cooperate with me doesn't change anything, Sasuke said simply. Sakura sighed and put her head in her hands. This was turning into a mess. But then, she was struck by a brilliant idea. Fine. Fine. I'll cooperate with you, she said while swiveling in her chair and placing her hands on her knees. But on one condition. He folded his arms across his chest. What condition? Sasuke asked. Before she could weigh the implications of her proposition, the words tumbled out of her mouth. You'll help me break into the hospital. Chapter 13 Nightmare. It only took one shuddering breath for Sakura to realize that something was off, the unfamiliar air catching in her throat. It tasted far too musty and she could feel its heaviness weighing down on her exposed skin. She opened her eyes a crack to find that she was in a dark cell with her back pressed up against a cold, stone wall. A jail cell? Now how on earth did she wind up in here? Sakura scanned her surroundings carefully for a means of escape, but there were no windows or openings in sight. Her vision was a little hazy and distorted, but through the darkness, she could make out the silhouette of a figure looming outside the bars of her cell. The figure placed a pale, white hand on one of the metal bars. Fear pulsed through her when she recognized the figure's chakra signature. It was Orochimaru's. Sakura motioned to scramble to her feet, but her body wasn't listening to her. Her limbs were so heavy that they were nearly immobile. Using all the strength she could muster, Sakura craned her neck towards the ground in search of a weapon, but there were none. Even her thigh was bare, her weapon holster was nowhere in sight. In fact, it appeared she was wearing a nightgown. And now that she got a proper look at herself, she noticed that something was different about her legs. They were muscular and toned. With a lurch, Sakura realized she was back in her older body. Which meant that the powers of the time travel scroll had broken. Not that it mattered. Whichever life she was in, right now she was completely and utterly defenseless. And then, to Sakura's horror, a pair of enormous snakes slithered between the bars and into her cell. They were as huge as pythons except jet black with bulging, yellow eyes piercing her hungrily. She opened her mouth to yell for help but no sound came out. That was when she felt scaly skin against her ankles as the snakes began coiling around her calves and spiraling up her bare legs. She couldn't move or speak. So she sat there, eyes wide with terror, as the snakes pinned her more firmly back against the wall. A shift in her periphery indicated that the figure was now in her cell, staring down at her amusedly, his arms folded across his chest. And it wasn't Orochimaru. It was Sasuke. The Sasuke of her old life. Her heart sank. This couldn't be happening. Ah, Sakura, he drawled, his lips curling into a menacing smile, his hand leisurely resting on the handle of a sword secured at his hip. It has been a while, he added while tilting his head in greeting. Sakura withered against the tight hold of the snakes, trying to wrench her gaze away from the deranged look in Sasuke's blood-red eyes. But she couldn't. His Sharingan were spinning and Sakura knew she had already fallen victim to his Genjutsu spell. She squinted up at her former teammate through the darkness while pushing against her scaly restraints, which were now twisting down the lengths of her arms. It was no use. She couldn't move at all. What are you doing? She stammered out hoarsely, finally finding her voice. And then, to her surprise, Sasuke chuckled. The sound held an unkind, dangerous ring. He approached slowly and crouched over Sakura's trapped body, his red eyes wide and locked on hers the entire time. There is no Sasuke here, he hissed while arching his body lower to shorten the gap between them. You are too late. He raised his hand abruptly and Sakura half expected Sasuke to strike her. But instead he clawed at his own forehead and started peeling away the skin on the right side of his face like a shedding snake. His face beneath the peeled-back skin was white, so white that at first glance, Sakura thought it was bone. But then a long, narrow tongue curled past his parted lips and his eyes rolled back into his skull. They were replaced by the yellow eyes of a snake. And that wasn't his skeleton peeking through his torn skin. It was a bony, white face. A face she knew too well. Sakura started screaming, trying to escape the half Sasuke half Orochimaru, but he was drawing nearer, his breath hot on her face and his long, skeletal fingers curling around her throat. Sakura bolted upright in her bed screaming, trembling, and drenched in sweat. Wasting no time, she sprang to her feet, snatched up the knife she had stowed under her pillow and waved it around wildly. Her heartbeat was pounding in her ears. Where was Orochimaru? The snakes? And Sasuke, what happened to him? Did Orochimaru finally take his body for a host? Crash! Right on cue, someone smashed through her bedroom window. But Sakura's nerves were on high alert. She was ready. She caught a glimpse of a pair of Sharingan-lit eyes through the flying shards of glass and decided that whether it was Sasuke or Orochimaru in Sasuke's body, she wasn't taking any chances. Sakura, Sasuke started, but Sakura's chakra-loaded fist got him square in the face before he could finish, sending him crashing into the opposite wall of her bedroom. That was when a thought occurred to Sakura. Wasn't she just in a jail cell? When had she returned to her bedroom? And her body felt a whole lot lighter, a whole lot younger than it did when she was pinned down by the snakes. But she didn't have much time to ponder this because in a split second, a chain of events unfolded. Sasuke crashing into the wall set off several of the booby traps he'd previously laid out in her room. What the? He started as a barrage of kunai pelted down from her ceiling, two of them lodging in his leg. He awkwardly rolled to the side while trying to support a bleeding nose, and narrowly avoided a net that was launched at him from its hiding place behind her desk. Sakura stared, bewildered, at the scene before her, her eyes darting from her fist to the injured Sasuke on her bedroom floor. His nose was bleeding heavily despite his attempt to pinch it and stifle the blood flow. Two kunai were embedded deep in his left leg, and as he pulled himself up to his feet, she noticed that he was quite uncoordinated. He looked about as confused as she felt. What the hell was that? He growled and glaring at her through the darkness, his eyes narrowed with rage. And now that she got a good look at him, Sakura noted that his skin wasn't peeling off his face at all. In fact, he bore no resemblance to Orochimaru. The older Sasuke wasn't here. And come to think of it, the older Sasuke didn't exist anymore. Oh. Whoops. A nightmare, Sakura whispered, more to herself than to him, as it slowly dawned on her the mess she'd just created. Sasuke looked murderous. So, there's no one breaking into your room? He asked through the hand clenched around his nose, his tone flat. No, I suppose not. Besides you, anyways. He was livid now, but Sakura didn't catch his angry retaliation because the voice of her father was rumbling down the hallway. Sakura? What on earth is going on in there? Oh no. Her eyes widened when her brain finally processed that her bedroom window was completely smashed. Her parents had evidently just heard her screaming, and now Sasuke's blood was all over her bedroom floor. And, not to mention, he was still in the room. This didn't look good. Get out. She hissed at her teammate, his petrified look mirroring her own. She tossed him the first piece of fabric within arm's reach and shoved it to his face to staunch the bleeding while pushing him towards her window. There was a loud knocking at her door. Sakura? Are you in there? Cried a voice, this time the voice of her mother. Yes. Sakura answered distractedly, just as Sasuke stumbled back out her window and disappeared into the night. While she spun back around, she absently noticed a bothersome pain in her feet. Glancing down, Sakura deduced that she'd tread on some shards of glass and perfect. Her feet were bleeding all over the floor. Now the blood Sasuke left behind might pass as hers. After quickly deactivating the traps around the door, unlocking it, and throwing the door open, Sakura greeted her worried parents with the brightest of smiles. Hi. She beamed, as if her bedroom didn't look like a crime scene. Which it most certainly did. Sakura, what? Don't worry about a thing, Mom. I can be a very active sleeper. And that was how Sakura ended up hiding in her parents' garden in the dead of night, picking shards of glass out of her feet and healing the broken nose of her very unhappy teammate. It took a while for Sakura to explain to her parents that she had kicked through the window in her sleep, and she had a feeling they weren't entirely sold on her story. Her mother suggested she speak to a counselor about channeling her anger through healthier outlets, and her father vented about how expensive fixing the window would be. But, all in all, they seemed relieved that their daughter was safe and that they could go back to bed. Sakura would probably hear more about it in the morning, but until then, she was in the clear. Once she was certain her parents were asleep, Sakura crept out to her yard where she detected Sasuke's chakra signature. He was sitting on the bench in her mother's flower garden next to a pair of bloody kunai, which Sakura presumed he had pulled out of his leg. He was using the soft material Sakura had thrust at him previously, which, Sakura realized with a pang of dread, was her favorite training dress, to stifle the bleeding in his leg. They sat there in silence for a long while in the cool, dark garden as Sakura patched up their injuries. She was wearing a nightgown and a chilly breeze raised goosebumps across her exposed arms and legs. Ignoring her growing urge to shiver, she focused her energy on the medical chakra radiating from her hands. She only ventured to break the silence once Sasuke's nose was entirely healed. You didn't stick to the plan, Sakura said flatly without looking up from his leg, and she was thankful to find that the kunai wounds were healing nicely. We agreed that we'd start tracking down the stalker tomorrow night. I know that, he said, his voice equally monotone, but Sakura could tell he was biting back some kind of emotion, which she suspected was fury. I was just surveilling the area. Sakura raised her eyebrows. Surveilling the area? She repeated and casting him a skeptical glance. Is that how you normally spend your time in the middle of the night? That doesn't concern you, Sasuke snapped and shooting her an angry glare, but she returned it, feeling her own anger stirring. You came crashing through my bedroom window. She retorted, her voice rising. Of course this concerns me. Sasuke was now running his fingers along the bridge of his freshly healed nose, inspecting it for aches and pains. So I was just supposed to leave you in there screaming? He answered, and it annoyed her how he managed to keep his tone calm and collected. Or would you have preferred I knocked on the window and asked for permission to save you from a potential attacker? Sakura gritted her teeth. It was hard to argue with someone with such good intentions. As angry as she was, her heart clenched at the thought of his stubborn persistence to protect her. It was far too much of a coincidence that he happened to be surveilling near her house in the middle of the night. Fine, I get it, Sakura grumbled, her frustration dissipating. I'm just a little shaken up from the nightmare. Let's go back to the original plan tomorrow, alright? Sasuke rose to his feet, testing out his leg. At your hospital shift tomorrow, gather as much information as possible for your end of the deal, he said, providing an indirect answer to her question. We have a few more days left before our next mission. I would like to have your part taken care of by then. Sakura nodded, thankful that Sasuke was addressing her breaking into the hospital scheme in vague terms. It might be the middle of the night, but in the ninja world, you never knew who was listening. Alright, she said dismissively and also standing up. I guess I'll be off to bed then. She paused. I mean, the couch. I can't sleep in a room with a gaping hole in the wall, I suppose. You can't, he agreed, a little distractedly. He seemed to be in deep contemplation about something. But you only have to make it through one more night. I'll tell you the details when you get off work tomorrow, he said. Let's make that after dinner, Sakura corrected, remembering that she had an important errand to run. I have somewhere to be in the afternoon. Sasuke cast her a suspicious glance before shrugging and walking away. Whatever. Good night. He stepped out of her garden and Sakura caught one fleeting glimpse of an Uchiha crest on a nearby rooftop before Sasuke disappeared from sight. It was rather heart-wrenching to compare this Sasuke to the one in her nightmares. While Sakura had been healing his nose only moments prior, she couldn't help flinching at the sight of his face at such a proximity with images from her nightmare salient in her mind. That dream had been too vivid and too reminiscent of a darker life she had once lived. And as she had placed her glowing, green hands on Sasuke's face to heal it, she'd half expected his closed eyes to snap open and cast her a deranged stare, or for him to claw at her throat with long, skeletal fingers. But he didn't. He wouldn't. Because this Sasuke valued her life. And was willing to go far lengths to care for it. Sakura picked up the pair of kunai and her blood-soaked dress before heading back to the house, using all her effort to clear her mind. Thinking about the Sasuke of the present was as much of a nightmare as thinking of the one in her past. Because she knew that if she failed to change the course of history, there would be no difference between them. Chapter 14 First Date. Thump. 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 I know you're in there. Sakura yelled at the locked wooden door before her. Let me in, Ino. Sakura decided it was about time she made amends with her childhood friend. She was certain that the reasons for Ino's bitterness towards her were superficial and could be curbed if the two of them just sat down and talked things through, girl to girl. After all, Sakura was clean out of medical herbs. Given her natural aptitude for brewing medicinal ointments, Sakura realized that if she was to prove to her supervisors at the hospital that she deserved a promotion despite her age, this might be her best shot. But she wasn't going to get her hands on any of the supplies she needed without Ino's compliance. Let me in, pig. She called at the Yamanaka flower shop door, the old nickname slipping out before she could stop herself. Maybe she isn't here? Sakura wondered, but then a small, delicate hand appeared in the shop window. The hand promptly flipped the open sign around, revealing the words closed instead. All right. Maybe that old nickname isn't helping my case. Look, Ino, Sakura said with a sigh, loudly enough that anyone inside could surely hear her, and resting her forehead against the door. I know you're mad at me. I'm sorry. And if you don't want to talk about it now, that's fine. We don't have to. Not a peep was made from within the shop. Sakura gritted her teeth. She was growing frustrated but was stubbornly determined to have a proper interaction with the girl behind that door. In fact, let's not talk about it at all. There are way more important things to spend our time on, anyways, she fumed. It was true, after all. Ino's petty attempt to create drama was just going to slow down Sakura's progress and decrease her chances of completing her time travel mission. She needed those herbs. The entire village was at stake, damn it. Then, to her surprise, the door unlocked with a soft click. Sakura jumped back as the door was wrenched open, revealing a very annoyed-looking Ino. Well, if you don't want to talk, what are you here for, forehead? she snapped, her blue eyes narrowing. Oh. Good question. Sakura mumbled while gazing down at her feet, feeling a blush creep across her cheeks. She started fiddling with the hem of her red shirt as she tried to formulate a believable lie. Wait. Shirt. That's it. I need to go shopping, Sakura said, and bravely meeting the platinum blonde's eyes. My training dress is ruined. Now that was entirely true. In fact, not only was Sakura's training dress soaked with Sasuke's blood, but she'd already thrown it out in a public dumpster to avoid explaining to her parents how it got to that state. Ino cocked an eyebrow and rested her hands on her hips. And why should I help you? She snarled. However, Sakura did notice her expression brighten slightly at the mention of shopping. Just one more little push. Because you have better fashion sense than I do, she answered. You always pick the best things for me, and I was wondering if you could help me out again, Sakura tried and putting on a hopeful smile. There was no doubt that Ino had an eye for fashion. For instance, Ino was the one who urged Sakura to stop hiding her larger-than-average forehead behind her bangs, and, in Sakura's previous life, it was Ino who suggested that Sakura invest in a sleeveless training outfit with a shorter, pink skirt. Not only will this be easier to move around in, Ino had said all those years ago, but the color just brings your entire outfit together. And, as it turned out, she was right. Sakura had adored that skirt. Ino averted her gaze, her face tinting a soft shade of pink. Well, it's lucky you asked me now, she said, and pursing her lips. I was just closing up the shop for my lunch break. So I might have a few minutes to spare. After visiting 3 clothes shops, Ino helped Sakura piece together a new training outfit. Both girls agreed not to deviate too far from Sakura's signature style, and so they picked out another red dress with a high collar to use as a base. But Ino noted that Sakura's signature look needed a couple of key upgrades. Your old dress simply wasn't practical, she said briskly, while rooting through racks of women's training gear. The skirt was much too long and the sleeves were baggy. And it had absolutely no sex appeal. Honestly, Sakura. It's probably a good thing you went and ruined it. She shot Sakura a pointed look, who rolled her eyes in return. Yeah, whatever you say, pig, she said as a smirk graced her lips. As annoying as the teasing was, the return of her friend's characteristically sassy demeanor was refreshing. And, Sakura had to admit, the final product she and Ino picked out looked pretty fantastic. The new, sleeveless dress was shorter than her old one, ending around mid-thigh, and split down either side as not to impede her movement on missions, and so she could still pair it with her black spandex shorts. Sakura wasn't interested in any of the outfits that would expose her midriff, much to Ino's dismay, so they settled on a dress that included a thick, black band around the waist, which Sakura liked because it had pouches for storage and Ino liked because it accentuated her figure, and a white trim. With some encouraging from Ino, Sakura invested in a few extra accessories that greatly resembled the ones she had in her old life: a pair of black gloves, black-heeled boots, and a large pouch to fasten on the back of her black waistband and store medical supplies. She felt at home in her new boots, which were more like tall-heeled sandals, because thanks to her personal training sessions with Tsunade, she'd learned to use high heels to her advantage in battle. And the gloves were custom-made so that they didn't wear down with chakra concentration, keeping her hands soft and unscathed for medical procedures. All in all, Sakura had a pleasant afternoon, and she was hopeful that Ino did too. By the end of their outing, Ino even opened up about her recent missions, some town gossip, and her annoying teammates. Not once was a certain teammate of Sakura's mentioned, she noticed, which prompted her to believe that maybe if Ino didn't see Sakura interacting with him, she would forget why she was ever angry with Sakura in the first place. In the coming days, Sakura did a splendid job of minimizing her public interactions with Sasuke. They barely spoke to each other during the days, in fact, aside from the odd exchange during Team 7's training sessions. And he didn't seem to mind. Sasuke was never one to initiate casual conversation anyways. So surely no one, not even the ever-watchful Kakashi, would suspect that she'd been sleeping on the couch in Sasuke's flat. You might want to stop at your place to gather your things, Sasuke had commented 2 nights prior after an evening of training with Sakura. Things? She had repeated between gulps of water while casting her teammate a curious glance. You're sleeping on my couch tonight. Sakura rolled her eyes at the memory. She had reluctantly complied with Sasuke's rather demanding request that she avoid her bedroom at night. The arrangement was only temporary, he explained, until they decided on the proper bait to lure out the predator and capture him once and for all. And it wasn't so bad, Sakura eventually reasoned, since she was always at his flat late into the night to plan their hospital break-in anyways. Sasuke's flat was sparse and had a simple blueprint. There was a small sitting room on the left, an even smaller kitchen on the right, and a hallway leading to his bedroom, storage closet, and bathroom down the center. Sakura spent her time at the kitchen table or on his sitting room couch and didn't dare roam or touch anything without approval. They quickly fell into a routine, where, after dinner, Sakura would pack her training gear after explaining to her parents that she was heading out for her extracurricular training with Sasuke as she always did, slip away to the Uchiha residence, and just as it was getting close to bedtime, but after she was sure her parents were asleep, she would create a shadow clone and send it back home to sleep in her bed. And the plan was foolproof, really, since Sakura made sure she was awake at the crack of dawn each day and was home before Sasuke and her parents woke. That way, if her shadow clone jutsu broke while she slept, she would be home to replace it before its absence could rouse any suspicions. Her sleeps at Sasuke's place were riddled with the odd nightmare, but none were as horrific as the nightmare that prompted Sasuke to crash through her bedroom window. Luckily, Sakura's parents paid for the replacement window and didn't seem to suspect Sasuke's involvement in it breaking. However, Sakura's mother was adamant that Sakura needed professional counseling for her sleeping problems. She was convinced that the extraneous ninja lifestyle was traumatizing Sakura out of a good night's sleep. They offer those services at the hospital. As an employee, I'm entitled to some free sessions, she said to appease her parents and keep them out of her hair. Because, honestly, as much as she would probably benefit from it, opening up to a counselor about the sources of her nightmares would probably land her in an asylum. As far as her break-in planning was concerned, Sakura made use of her shifts at the hospital to collect data. She knew where the MRI machines were located, but the catch was that given her subordinate role, she wasn't supposed to be anywhere near them. On the day she decided to get lost in the radiology wing of the hospital, she tried to peek into a room with an MRI machine to gain her bearings. But the door was slammed shut in her face. "What are you doing here?" asked a stern-looking lab technician who must have just finished up in the room Sakura wanted to snoop in. "You don't have authorization to be in this wing." "And nothing," Sakura answered hurriedly and turning on her heel. "I'm just looking for my supervisor." "Sorry," she added over her shoulder before rounding the corner and striding away down an adjacent hallway. Damn. That was close. They were extremely strict about entering unauthorized areas, particularly with Sakura being on her 3-month probation. She had been hoping to check what model of MRI machine was currently used in Konoha's hospital. She would complete the procedure faster if she knew exactly how to use the machine before she got there, after all. But she lost her chance, so instead, she signed out every book on MRI machines from the hospital's medical reference library and studied them thoroughly. "Why don't you just try to look in the room again?" Sasuke asked while setting down her mug of tea. She was so immersed in her reading that she jumped at the sound of his voice, having nearly forgotten that she was sitting at his kitchen table. "It would be nice to know if there are any windows in there for a quick escape if we get caught. And all of this studying seems a little unnecessary." He cast her heaping piles of books a skeptical glance. "Because," Sakura said exaggeratedly as she scribbled another point down in her notebook, "I can't risk losing their trust. If anyone at the hospital suspects I'm up to something, there's absolutely no way we'll get away with this." She finally tore her eyes away from the text to shoot him a serious look. "You'll be the one operating the machine while I'm inside of it, you know. These detailed instructions are for you. So you're welcome." Sasuke raised his eyebrows. "Oh, right," he said. "Thank you for letting me risk my future career to help you break into the hospital for a reason you won't tell me." His expression was blank, but the corners of his mouth twitched as he apparently resisted an urge to smirk. "Hey!" Sakura exclaimed with a frown. "I'm holding up my end of the deal." "So you're getting something out of this?" "I guess so," Sasuke said with a shrug. After a pause, he added, "But you still won't explain why we're doing this, will you?" "No," she answered shortly and directing her attention back to the papers. "Not yet, at least." Sasuke rolled his eyes and turned away. "Well, I'm going to bed." "See you," he said with a small sigh and running his fingers through his tousled, black hair. "Right. Good night," she answered, but Sakura's eyes followed her teammate as he stalked down the hallway to his bedroom. His interest in this arrangement was puzzling her. Instead of spending their nights at the training grounds, which was, without question, Sasuke's favorite place, he was willingly staying here at his flat, helping Sakura with a scheme he didn't even know the purpose of. All in exchange for keeping Sakura under his watchful eye? Now she was starting to wonder what was he actually getting out of this. Finally, the day arrived for the hospital break-in plan to be executed and Sakura was confident that they were as ready as could be. She and Sasuke had memorized a map of the hospital which identified where the video cameras and traps were set up, based on her recent scouting combined with memories from her previous life. Sakura had also trained Sasuke how to basically operate an MRI machine, which was a task he would be responsible for after she set it up and hopped inside of it. That morning, during Team 7's training session, Sakura couldn't quell the thoughts of the upcoming break-in. She felt a little guilty for breaking the rules in her own workplace. But, she reminded herself, these brain scans might hold life-altering secrets with direct implications for her time travel mission. "Sakura-chan." A voice distracted her from her thoughts. "Yes, Naruto?" Sakura asked calmly and glancing up from where she stood against the rail of the bridge. "Your clothes," he said with bulging eyes. He looked her up and down without making any effort to hide his stare. They're sexy. I like them, Sakura-chan." "Oh," Sakura mumbled and feeling heat rise in her face. Today was the first day she'd tried on her new training outfit. Apparently Ino wasn't kidding that her old outfit needed upgrades in the sex appeal department. "Thanks, Naruto." Sasuke, who was leaning on the rail opposite her, didn't seem to share Naruto's appreciation for her new clothes. "Looks impractical," he mumbled and eyeing her heeled boots skeptically. "Only if you don't know what you're doing in them," she retorted while folding her arms. And despite whatever Sasuke thought of her outfit, 14 hours later when it was just about midnight, Sakura was striding alongside him down the dark streets of Konoha with the outfit on under a white lab coat. Her heels clicked softly against the solid ground beneath them. "Would you keep it down?" he hissed. He glanced at her feet and was apparently quite annoyed with the sound they made. "We aren't using stealth," Sakura reminded him. "I'm going to walk straight through the front door and let you in at the side entrance I told you about." "I know," he mumbled, but Sakura knew he was still disconcerted over her choice of footwear. Sakura figured that breaking in at night would be their best bet. The hospital typically had less staff when it was late since regular checkups were held during the daytime. The only patients who needed tending to at night were those in long-term care facilities or with critical injuries. So when Sakura let Sasuke in at the side entrance, she promptly stabbed him in the arm with a kunai. He knew it was coming, but he still flinched with surprise. "I would have appreciated a warning before you did that," Sasuke growled through gritted teeth as she smeared his spilling blood all down his arm. "Shoo," she said and dragging him into the hospital's maze of hallways. "You're my patient now." Sasuke reluctantly stumbled along after her, taking on his newly assigned role. Sakura knew the only shot they had at getting into the heavily guarded hospital was from the inside. And thankfully, the first part of Sasuke and Sakura's plan was executed flawlessly, thanks to their meticulous preparation and plenty of dumb luck. No one stopped them on their way to the radiology wing. In fact, the few who crossed their paths nodded or waved at Sakura or barely spared them a glance. Sasuke kept his head low as Sakura dragged him on through the halls, but Sakura knew his Sharingan were activated and keeping a sharp lookout for unwanted disturbances. And once they were safely locked in one of the rooms with an MRI machine, Sakura was relieved to find that the model of machine was one she had studied and could probably operate with her eyes closed. They swiftly took action with Sasuke using his Sharingan to monitor the hallway for intruders and Sakura firing the machine up. She programmed it to send the scans of her brain directly to her personal electronic files. Then she had Sasuke explain to her what he was about to do before climbing into the white tube and lying flat on her back. She closed her eyes and the machine roared to life. She kept her eyes firmly shut as she was surrounded by echoing bangs and beeps until the machine fell silent several minutes later. Assuming Sasuke had followed all of her directions, their work was finished. She climbed out and found that Sasuke was shifting his gaze between the controls and the door. "I'm done," he said. "And there are a few people in the hallway, so let's wrap this up." "That's fine," Sakura replied briskly. "I just have to erase the data before we go." And, once again, everything seemed to go smoothly. Sakura managed to strip all of their data from the machine's history after she sent herself the scans. Then she shut the machine down, switched off the lights, and when Sasuke gave her the go-ahead, pulled him back out into the hallway. Piece of cake. Or so she thought. They had only taken a few steps down the hall when Sakura noticed that Sasuke's arm, which still had her kunai embedded in it, was starting to drip blood onto the polished, white floor. She cursed under her breath, realizing that if she didn't mop it up, anyone who suspected that an MRI machine was used without authorization had an extremely obvious DNA sample to track her teammate down with. Sakura made a quick detour to a nearby bathroom to grab some paper towels and soap before hurrying back to scrub the floor. Sasuke kept watch while attempting to staunch the bleeding with the white sleeve around his forearm. Sakura barely had enough time to clean up any of the blood when Sasuke suddenly grabbed the back of the black band around Sakura's waist and gave it a yank. With a yelp of surprise, Sakura was forced to stumble backwards until her back slammed against the wall. Only then did Sasuke release the band and raise his uninjured arm in front of her, indicating that she needed to stay beside him. But before she had a chance to express her confusion, voices and loud, hurried footsteps echoed from a short distance away. Moments later, a crowd of medical ninjas carrying a stretcher raced around the corner and into view. They dashed right past Sasuke and Sakura, trampling over the drops of blood Sakura had missed, and whisked who Sakura assumed was a traumatic brain injury patient, into one of the nearby rooms. That was close. Sakura's heart was racing a mile a minute and her forehead was damp with sweat. They needed to get out of here. Sasuke was right, if they got caught, both of their future careers would be in jeopardy. And, not to mention, any hope of success in Sakura's time travel mission was at stake. If she got fired from the hospital, her chances of getting any real medical experience was impossible, and the village would never allow her to rise to a position of influence. She exchanged a quick look with Sasuke, whose expression seemed to hold the same panic and resolve that she felt. They booked it. Sasuke and Sakura ran down the winding hallways, down a flight of stairs, past several surprised-looking people in white coats, back out the side entrance, and as far away from the hospital as their legs could carry them. Sakura reasoned that their work was done, so there was no sense creeping around. As long as they avoided the security cameras and she used chakra to conceal the sound of her heels hitting the solid ground, the sooner they got out of there, the better. "Keep going," Sasuke called over his shoulder, his Sharingan activated, as they raced out the door and into the chilly, night air. As they sprinted through a clearing separating the hospital from the main road, Sakura kept in stride with her teammate, her adrenaline keeping her legs and arms pumping until the hospital was out of sight. Finally, they rounded one last corner and emerged from an alley between two office buildings. They were back in the village core. Sakura doubled over to catch her breath and could hear that Sasuke too was breathing heavily. The dark road was deserted, aside from the odd couple stumbling home from a late night drinking at the local pub on their right. Sakura figured it was around 1 in the morning. Once she composed herself, Sakura stripped off her white lab coat and slung it over her shoulder while Sasuke finally pulled the kunai out of his arm, splattering more of his blood onto the ground. "I'm not sure I liked that plan," Sasuke mumbled while wincing and eyeing his arm apprehensively. Let me heal that, Sakura replied curtly and beckoning for him to offer her his arm. Sasuke raised his eyebrows but obeyed her request nonetheless. She hooked her arm around his and started pulling him down the street, using the coat over her shoulder to conceal their intertwined arms and the green, glowing chakra in her hand. The less attention drawn to them, the better. I can't believe we did that, she breathed after a moment of walking through the dark streets. She could feel the wound on Sasuke's arm close beneath her gloved fingers. Sasuke snorted. I'll say, he said. At least it was interesting. Sakura raised her eyebrows. Interesting? He shrugged. The stealth was good training. And also a bit enjoyable. Enjoyable? Sakura gaped at her teammate and the contentment written on his face. He chuckled when he caught sight of her dropped jaw. I suppose Sasuke always did have an affinity for breaking laws. Well, I'm freaking out, she said. I can tell, Sasuke replied. After all, he could probably feel her racing pulse against his arm. Don't get your hopes up that we'll ever do that again, she huffed just as the scab on Sasuke's arm disappeared in her hand. But Sakura didn't release his arm just yet. She was feeling quite on edge and holding on to him was steadying. Besides, they blended in with their surroundings better this way with there being so many intoxicated people nearby with their arms strewn around each other for support and, well, other things. Sakura averted her gaze to the narrow path ahead of them which led into the Uchiha compound. After a pause, Sasuke spoke again. Maybe you're right, he said. Next time it will be somewhere else. Sakura opened her mouth and closed it again. Next time? She repeated. Did he really think she regularly broke into places? Or was he just getting a kick out of making her panic? Just where do you propose we go next time? Next time for what? Said a new voice directly behind them. The pair of them stopped dead in their tracks and a chill ran down Sakura's spine. She hadn't even sensed anyone there. When Sakura whirled around with surprise, she found herself face to face with none other than their silver-haired, masked sensei with his orange book in hand. Kakashi looked unfazed, but Sakura knew too well that he was a master of disguising his emotions. Considering how he likely found her suspicious, catching her wandering the village in the middle of the night wasn't a good look. Sasuke looked equally surprised as he stared at Kakashi in silence, clearly unsure how to respond. Sakura racked her brain for an excuse. Maybe she'd better unhook her arm from Sasuke's because that in itself looked a little strange. Then she was struck with a crazy idea. We were on a date, she lied evenly. Sorry for being out so late. I promise this won't interfere with our training, she added with a polite bow. She could hardly believe the words spilling out of her mouth. Sasuke tensed and Sakura didn't dare look in his direction. Kakashi glanced up from his book with an expression of mild interest. Really now? He mused, his visible eye lazily shifting between his two students. Well, I guess that explains a lot, he said, an amused expression appearing on his face. Don't let me keep you. Sorry for interrupting. Why, you're not interrupting anything, Sakura said with a forced smile and feeling her face glow red with embarrassment. But her sensei only smiled. Have a good night, you too. He turned to leave, but then I have a book I could lend you if you need advice, he added with a twinkle in his eye before vanishing in a cloud of smoke, leaving Sasuke and Sakura alone on the dark path in complete silence. When she was certain Kakashi was completely out of range, as casually as possible, Sakura untangled her arm from Sasuke's and stepped away from him. He mirrored the action. Then, hesitantly, Sakura continued along the path towards the Uchiha compound and Sasuke wordlessly followed suit. Her head was spinning. What the hell just happened there? She couldn't believe she told Kakashi that they were on a date. Sasuke was probably pissed off beyond belief. But she figured that at least Kakashi would leave them alone now, right? Well, this complicates things. Sakura snapped her head in her teammate's direction and found him staring determinedly ahead. She was a little surprised that he had broken the silence. What do you mean? She asked. You know I was lying. I do, Sasuke agreed. His brows were furrowed with concentration. But Kakashi doesn't trust you. And if he finds out you lied to him for being out at this hour, he'll trust you less. Sakura stopped walking. Her heart sank. Because Sasuke's comment confirmed what she was dreading. Kakashi's negative sentiments towards her weren't in her imagination. Our team will suffer as a result, Sasuke continued with a sigh. Kakashi won't want you going on high-ranked missions which will hold all of us back. Well, what do we do now? She asked as it dawned on her the huge mistake she made. Sasuke clenched his jaw. I don't think we have a choice. Chapter 15 Regeneration. There was something fishy going on. Something very fishy indeed. As they did every morning, Team 7 arrived at their designated meeting spot, a bridge near the training grounds, before starting their exercises for the day. And, as usual, Kakashi was the last to show up. In the meantime, Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura leaned against the bridge rails, rubbing the sleep out of their eyes and counting down the minutes until their sensei graced them all with his presence. So there was nothing out of the ordinary there. But, once Kakashi did arrive, the strange behavior his two teammates exhibited did not go unnoticed by Naruto Uzumaki, the most perceptive ninja in the Hidden Leaf Village. If he did say so himself. Good morning, Kakashi said with a lazy wave. Sorry I'm late. A black cat crossed my path, so I had to take the long way. Naruto folded his arms and scrunched up his face in concentration. That was the exact same excuse his sensei gave the team yesterday. How was it there were so many black cats in the village, anyways? Liar, Sakura said with a sigh, impatiently running her fingers down the length of her pink, shoulder-length hair. Wait. Liar? Why, maybe she was right. Yeah, we're on to you. Believe it. Naruto chimed in enthusiastically while raising a threatening finger at his sensei. But Kakashi only chuckled in response. Have a good night, you guys? He asked with a smile. And was that a wink? In Sasuke and Sakura's direction on the opposite rail? Yes, that was definitely a wink. And by the way his two teammates shifted uncomfortably and shot each other knowing looks, Naruto just knew something was going on. Did they have a secret mission together and forget to invite him along? We had a great night, Sakura said with a shaky smile and inching closer to Sasuke, who was nodding wordlessly at her side. And then she... Oh god, this couldn't be happening. Sakura reached out and grabbed Sasuke's hand. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that Sasuke didn't push her hand aside or flinch away. He was letting her lace her fingers with his like it was no big deal. There was clearly something wrong with Sasuke today. With both of them. With all of them. Naruto couldn't help feeling angry. Why was everyone acting like they knew something that he didn't? Why wasn't anyone holding his hand? He would get to the bottom of this mystery if it was the last thing he did. Alright team, time to get down to business, Kakashi then said. He straightened up and pulled slips of paper out of his weapon pouch. So this may come as a surprise to you guys, but I've put your names down for the Chunin selection exams. Naruto blinked at his sensei with surprise. You aren't serious, he said, his mind racing. Does Kakashi-sensei really think I could be a Chunin? Kakashi raised his eyebrows and made a face that probably meant, I am very serious, idiot. And so Naruto's celebratory cheering commenced. This was absolutely perfect. If he was a Chunin, that would make him only 2 ranks below the Hokage. And he'd make more money on his mission so he could treat Iruka-sensei to ramen. Well, not that he would refuse Iruka's offers to pay, but still. His thoughts were interrupted by the gut-wrenching sound of someone puking. Naruto's head snapped up with surprise and he noticed that Sakura was now crouched in the forest outskirts beside the bridge, seemingly retching into the bushes. Gosh, he hadn't even seen her run over there. And why was she sick so suddenly, anyways? Hey, Sakura-chan. He started and running over to where she was heaving. But Sasuke beat him to it. What's wrong with you? Sasuke demanded and standing over their female teammate with his arms folded. Despite his blunt question, he looked pretty worried. Upset stomach? Chimed in Kakashi and joining his students. Sakura nodded without sparing him a glance. She was trembling all over and from the angle Naruto stood, her face looked extremely pale. You should go home, Sakura-chan, Naruto said firmly while Sasuke kneeled down beside her, gesturing to help her up. Maybe you caught something at the hospital. Naruto's right, said Kakashi with a nod. In fact, you can all go home if you'd like. I want you to mull over whether you think you are truly ready to take part in the exams. He closed his orange book dismissively and was about to leave when he added, Sasuke, take good care of Sakura. See you all tomorrow. And then he vanished in a cloud of smoke. Sasuke? Sasuke take care of Sakura? What about Naruto? Hey, I'm here too. Naruto yelled but Kakashi was already gone. I'll do a better job taking care of her than that bastard. Believe it. No, I'm fine guys, came Sakura's shaky voice as she used Sasuke's arm to pull herself up to her feet. Something came over me suddenly and I don't think we're ready for the exams. What? Naruto and Sasuke said in unison. Now that was unexpected. Sakura was now standing in an upright position with hunched shoulders. I know what's involved in them. We aren't ready. Just, promise me you guys won't go ahead and register without me. Take your time thinking it through. She wiped her mouth on the back of her trembling hand. Naruto and Sasuke exchanged glances. Where the hell was this coming from? Sakura was one of the toughest genin out there, and if anyone could pass the Chunin exams, she could. Heck, she'd even stood up to Zabuza the demon. Naruto bit back his urge to shout some sense into her when he caught the pleading look in her eye. Something told him now was not the time for protesting. We'll think it through, Sasuke said slowly but he sounded a little unsure of himself. Of course Sasuke wanted to enter the exams. He whined about the D-ranked missions they went on too, and the exams would be a perfect opportunity to face new, challenging opponents. We can register together when you're ready, Sakura-chan. We'll figure this out when you're feeling better, said Naruto with a firm nod. He too wanted to take the exams, but he also realized that openly disobeying Sakura was dangerous. Much to his relief, Sakura broke into a smile. You guys are the best, she said while patting her teammates' arms affectionately. Well, since training is cancelled, I'll go home and take a nap before work. See you guys. And then she picked up her backpack and turned to leave. I'll see you later, Sasuke called after her at which Naruto narrowed his eyes. There was something deliberate about the way Sasuke was speaking, like this wasn't just a casual goodbye. Naruto's suspicion was confirmed when Sakura turned back and shot Sasuke a small smirk. They were meeting up later? Something was definitely going on with those two. Since Team 7's battle with Zabuza, Naruto had been haunted by a powerful guilt for accidentally hurting Sakura. In all honesty, he couldn't clearly remember striking her. But when he registered that her unconscious body was crumpled on the ground before him, and his fist was outstretched in her direction, it didn't take much thinking to put two and two together. And what happened after that was perhaps the worst part of all. Kakashi freed himself from Zabuza and immediately restrained Naruto by pinning him to the ground like he was some uncaged, vicious animal. And Sasuke was yelling at him then. Yelling something in a tone filled with fury, grief, and the tiniest trace of fear. And it genuinely upset Naruto that he managed to create such a negative emotional response in his own teammate. Naruto was lucky Sakura forgave him when she woke up in the hospital. He really wasn't expecting her to. But he still had a nagging feeling that his teammates didn't feel safe around him. He knew they looked down on him. He knew they snuck out at night together. And he was sure Sakura had a thing for that stuck-up bastard like all the other girls did even though she didn't really show it. It was about time he put an end to feeling so out of the loop. He needed to get closer with his teammates if he was ever going to understand them. It was time to man up and take initiative. Oi, Sasuke. Naruto called after the Uchiha just before he turned to leave the bridge. The others were already long gone. Sasuke glanced back and raised his eyebrows, prompting his teammate to get to the point. Let's spar. After a brief pause, Sasuke turned back around. Right now? He asked flatly, but Naruto didn't fail to catch the energized glint in his eye. Yeah, Naruto said, a mischievous grin sprouting on his face. This was perfect. After all, he knew the best way to get to know someone better was to beat the shit out of them. And beat the shit out of Sasuke he did. Well, maybe for a couple of rounds. But who was really counting? Either way, Naruto had a great time. The two agreed to leave out ninjutsu and focus on hand-to-hand combat, aside from Naruto's shadow clones, which Sasuke claimed might actually make the fight worthwhile. The two of them roughed it out for nearly 3 hours, at which point they were both exhausted, covered in dirt, and supporting several cuts and bruises. That was great, Naruto said between heavy breaths while wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. Much more fun than tree climbing, he added while recalling the only other time he and Sasuke had an opportunity to train alone together. Yeah, Sasuke said from where he was crouched with his hands resting on his thighs. You're a little smarter than I thought. Hey! Naruto shot back, but he was too tired to think up a comeback, so instead he just laughed. He'd definitely get Sasuke back later with some witty line anyways. Sasuke smirked and shook his head before rising to his feet and slinging his bag over his shoulder. Well, I'd better get going, he said. Where to? Naruto asked as nonchalantly as he could, his curiosity spiking a little. If the rest of Team 7 was having a secret meeting, there was no way Naruto would risk being left out of it this time. Sasuke cast his blonde teammate a perplexed look. Home, I guess, he said, clearly having no idea why Naruto was taking any interest in his personal life. Naruto straightened up. You hungry? Naruto had to admit he felt pretty cool walking around the village and stopping to grab a bite with the famous Sasuke Uchiha. It made him look cooler. See, it was almost like doing charity work to help one of the most antisocial jerks mingle in the village like a normal human being. He was rather surprised that Sasuke agreed to join him for lunch at all. But while they were walking to Ichiraku, where Naruto insisted they went, Sasuke admitted that he disliked cooking, and then it occurred to Naruto that Sasuke was living on his own too. And Naruto knew, from first-hand experience, that growing up without a family could get a little boring. There wasn't really anything to do at home besides cook and clean, and Naruto refused to do either, unless you picked up some stationary hobbies. But even then the days without school or training could drag on forever. Not to mention, despite his coolness and charm, Naruto never had any good friends growing up. And he was certain that Sasuke never had any either. After taking their seats at the ramen bar, they started recounting the events of their recent taijutsu training session before the conversation shifted to the upcoming Chunin exams. I'm pretty pumped, Naruto said while flexing his arm and grinning enthusiastically. I'll finally get a chance to move up in the ranks and say goodbye to those lame D-ranked missions. Sasuke nodded. And we'll face real opponents in the exams, he said between sips of water. Since the Land of Waves mission we haven't had any real fights. And we weren't even supposed to go on that mission in the first place. But his attention was quickly averted when a steaming bowl of ramen was set down before him. Yes, finally! He exclaimed and reaching for his chopsticks. It felt like ages since he last tasted ramen. Well, ramen from a restaurant, that is. He had a bowl of instant ramen that morning. In fact, the last time he ate out was with Sakura, and that was at least a few days ago. Which, now that Naruto thought about it, ended up being a lunch with that quiet girl from the Hyuga clan, Hinata. She turned out to be a pretty nice girl. Sure, she wasn't very talkative, but she was one of the first people he'd ever spoken to who didn't cringe once in their whole conversation. After a few minutes of wolfing down the salty, pork-topped noodles, Naruto seemed to remember why he wanted to spend more time with Sasuke in the first place. He was here to gather information on the strange relationship between his teammates. Right, Chunin exams, Naruto continued through a full mouth. I wonder why Sakura-chan doesn't seem interested in them. Sasuke shrugged. I don't know, he said between bites. Well, how about we sign her up for the exams in secret? Naruto asked with a sneaky grin. I bet she'd thank us in the long run. Sasuke glanced at his teammate disbelievingly. She'd kill us, he said simply. And besides, I'm pretty sure that's against the rules. That's never stopped me from doing anything, Naruto said, and waving down the waiter to order another bowl. I could easily forge her signature. And besides, don't you think Sakura-chan will regret it if she doesn't take the exams? For a moment, Sasuke looked like he was considering Naruto's comment. But then he seemed to have a change of heart and said, that's not our problem. Naruto frowned. Really? That was all he had to say? Well, maybe it was time to take a different approach to bringing her into the conversation. I mean, Sakura-chan of all people has nothing to worry about in the exams, right? She's gotta be the strongest and smartest girl I've ever met, he gushed. She always knows exactly what to do in battle. And I mean, how many genin know how to use medical ninjutsu? None. She's such a genius, Naruto said while smiling fondly. As if he landed the coolest kunoichi on his team. So, Sasuke. What do you think about Sakura-chan? He then asked as casually as possible between slurps. Damn, am I ever smooth, he thought. Maybe if his plan to be Hokage didn't work out, which wouldn't be the case, but still, he could be an interrogator or an undercover detective. There was a short pause. I agree with what you just said, Sasuke mumbled while keeping his eyes trained on his bowl and chewing slowly and deliberately. Seriously? Naruto frowned. And that's all you think of her? Naruto asked, and trying to keep his tone as relaxed as possible. Sasuke's suspicious gaze drifted to his teammate. He opened his mouth to speak but was interrupted before he even got any words out. Hey, is that you, Naruto? And Sasuke? Is that Sasuke? Said a new voice. Darn, what awful timing. Sasuke was totally about to cave. Who was? Oh. Shikamaru and Choji. Come over here, guys. Naruto called. He sprang up to his feet and beckoned for the two boys from Team 10 to join them. Naruto sensed his own teammates' discomfort as the other boys approached, but he chose to ignore it. He was doing Sasuke a service by forcing him to improve his social skills. Hey boys, Shikamaru said in his usual laid-back tone. His eyes were heavy-lidded like he'd just woken from a nap, and his long, chestnut hair was tied up as it usually was. Must say I'm surprised to see you out and about, Sasuke, he added while easing himself into the empty chair beside Naruto. Sasuke merely shrugged in response. You guys think they'll let me order 3 servings at once? Asked Choji while he plopped himself down on Shikamaru's other side. I'm starving. And by the time I finish my first bowl, the waiter never comes by fast enough for me to order the next one in time. It's worth a shot, Naruto said with a grin. He liked the way that guy thought. But now it was time to get back on topic. He wasn't going to let the new arrivals distract him from the true reason he was out here with Sasuke in the first place. Maybe they could even help get some details out of the stubborn bastard. But, of course, he needed to work the topic into the conversation smoothly. So guys, Naruto tried in a cool, relaxed tone. We were just talking about what's going on between Sasuke and Sakura-chan. That was pretty smooth. Right? Oh, so you are dating then? Shikamaru asked and lazily glancing up from the menu. Ino asked me the other day. I told her no one cares and then she had a fit. Crazy woman. Wait. Dating? Sasuke and Sakura? No. No way. That simply wasn't possible. Naruto gave his teammate a scrutinizing glare, but Sasuke was still staring straight at his bowl as he fished around intently for the last couple of bites. Choji and Shikamaru's bowls were set down then, but Naruto wasn't going to let this subject of conversation die so easily. That's not true, is it? Naruto asked slowly, the wheels turning in his head. Now that he thought about it, hand-holding was something that couples did, wasn't it? And spending a lot of time alone together. Oh God. That was when Sasuke, calmly, set down his chopsticks and rose from his seat. Good lunch, he said, ignoring Naruto's question. See you later. Without waiting for anyone to reply, he placed a wad of money on the counter and stalked out of Ichiraku, leaving a shocked and confused Naruto behind. Hey! Wait, Sasuke. Naruto called after his teammate, but he was interrupted by Shikamaru tugging on the sleeve of his orange jacket. Leave him, Naruto. You're just going to piss him off, Shikamaru said. Besides, I think the answer to your question is pretty obvious now. Naruto whirled around to face the other boys. What do you mean obvious? I don't see it. There isn't enough evidence to prove they're dating. So I'm gonna go beat the truth out of that bastard. Naruto was angry now. Why were his teammates hiding so much from him? And why wasn't Sasuke answering any of his questions? This was the last straw. Easy there, Shikamaru sighed. Choji, who was just finishing up his third bowl, appeared oblivious to the entire exchange. Why don't you just talk to Sakura instead? She seems a whole lot easier to reason with. Talk to Sakura? Why, that was a brilliant idea. She was certainly more approachable than Sasuke was. See, this was why Naruto needed to keep smart guys like Shikamaru around. Okay, we'll talk to Sakura-chan this evening, Naruto announced and pounding his fist on the table for good measure. Shikamaru raised his eyebrows. Wait, what do you mean we? After dinner, Naruto showed up at Shikamaru's front door and dragged him outside. There was no way he would let the guy back out now. They made a fabulous team, after all, with Shikamaru being the brains and Naruto being the muscle. I never agreed to this, the lazy boy groaned as Naruto pulled him through the darkening streets. The sun was beginning to set now, casting long shadows across the village roads. Oh come on, Naruto whined. This is going to be fun. Trust me. Shikamaru sighed. That's doubtful. But if I back out now you'll never let me have any peace and quiet, will you? Naruto grinned. Exactly. He said. Wait, hold on. I think that's her. They rounded a corner onto Sakura Street just when said Kunoichi walked out her front door. She was certainly dressed for the warm summer evening, with a red, sleeveless shirt and gray cropped pants on. Her head protector and weapon pouch were nowhere in sight, which suggested that she wasn't heading to the training grounds. So the enormous backpack she was slinging on her shoulders caught Naruto's attention. If she wasn't training, why did she need such a big backpack? And where was Sakura going anyways? The library? The hospital? Well, that's a relief, Shikamaru said when he caught sight of Naruto's pink-haired teammate. Let's go talk to her now so I can go home. No. I have a better idea, Naruto said as he pulled Shikamaru back around the corner they'd just emerged from. We're going to follow her and find out what she's up to. He popped his head around the building he was pressed up against to track Sakura's movements. She was now looking over her shoulders. Oh, how suspicious. She's up to something. I know it. What a pain, Shikamaru mumbled and scratching the back of his neck. Well, she's already getting away, so you'd better hurry up. Naruto startled and leaped out onto Sakura Street. Gone? Already? Crap. She was nowhere in sight. He whirled around, searching for any sign of Pink. That was when he was wrenched back by the collar of his jacket. She took the rooftops, idiot. Come on, Shikamaru said, his voice dripping with annoyance, before he channeled chakra to his feet and launched himself into the air, dragging Naruto along with him. This couldn't be happening. This could not be happening. Sakura was going to the Uchiha residence. Naruto stared in horror, from behind the chimney of a nearby building, as his female teammate approached the front door to what he assumed was Sasuke's place, knocked twice, and silently slipped inside when the door was opened for her. He gritted his teeth. This whole thing wasn't sitting right with Naruto. His crush on Sakura aside, Naruto hated losing to his arch-nemesis. As much as he had a good time hanging out with Sasuke that day and how Sasuke might be less of an asshole than he originally thought, there was no way in hell he deserved to be with someone like Sakura. That was when a thought occurred to Naruto, one that carried such enormous implications that he even emitted a gasp. Sasuke was forcing Sakura to date him against her will. That must be it. After all, Sasuke was a socially awkward jerk who definitely didn't have the charm, skill, brains, or looks to keep a girl around. Okay, maybe he has some looks. But Sakura-chan isn't that shallow. Naruto pounded his fist against his open palm before gunning it towards Sasuke's apartment with an unstoppable resolve, his chakra flaring dangerously. He ignored Shikamaru's cries of protest because now was not the time for reasoning or logic. It was time to rescue Sakura. So when Naruto burst through Sasuke's front door, he was quite surprised to find Sakura sitting comfortably in what appeared to be a dimly lit kitchen. Until she caught sight of Naruto, that is. Sakura bolted upright so abruptly that she nearly knocked the chair out from under her. Naruto? She squeaked with surprise. What the hell are you doing here? And before Naruto could even open his mouth to answer, Sasuke stepped directly before him, from wherever he had been lurking in the shadows of the kitchen. With his arms folded and his jaw clenched, he asked, very quietly and calmly, "What do you want?" There was something intimidating about his soft tone and his dark, narrowed eyes. Oh, but Naruto wasn't backing down. "I'm here to save Sakura-chan from you, if you'd excuse me," Naruto snapped in the most threatening voice he could muster up and raising his arms to shove Sasuke aside. But a hand on his shoulder stopped him. And it wasn't Sasuke's. "Naruto, cut it out," Shikamaru said tiredly from behind him. "Guys, I'm sorry for walking in on you like this." Naruto just wanted to prove a point and, well, yeah, you know how it is with him. What? Sakura stammered from where she stood by the kitchen table. "You didn't walk in on anything." Her green eyes were wide and her hands were clasped against her stomach. Naruto raised an eyebrow. He wasn't going to believe that one bit. She was clearly hiding something. "Then why are you blushing?" he asked. "And stuttering?" God damn, Naruto amazed himself with how suave and analytical he was sometimes. "And why is there a picture of a human brain on the table behind you?" Shikamaru then asked, a trace of curiosity finding its way into his voice. He was nodding towards the kitchen table, which, Naruto noticed, Sakura seemed to be trying to shield from view. "Yeah, what's with the brains?" Naruto demanded. "That's the first thing I noticed when I walked in here." "Believe it." That was when Sakura and Sasuke exchanged wide-eyed looks. Aha. They were busted now for. Wait, if this was some secret romantic meeting they were crashing, why were there pictures of brains on the table anyways? "Alright," Sakura said after a long pause. "I can explain." Shortly after, Naruto found himself seated at Sasuke's kitchen table before a pile of textbooks and a small stack of brain scans. He couldn't help but appreciate how three of Konoha's most intelligent genin were now sitting around the same table. Oh, and Sasuke was there too. Under normal circumstances, Naruto would whine about how said Uchiha was lowering the room's overall IQ level. But Sasuke was currently putting on a pot of tea for all of them. So for now, he was in Naruto's good books. "So let me get this straight," said Shikamaru while closing his eyes and rubbing his temples in concentration. "You found something unusual in one of your patients' brain scans, so you took them home to conduct your own personal research?" Sakura tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear and bit her lip. "You guys have to promise not to say anything about this," she said a little hurriedly. "Technically this is illegal." Shikamaru nodded. Yeah. Whatever," he said with a shrug. "Well, I must say that these scans do strike me as a little weird." Naruto scrunched up his face in concentration as he peered down at the images. They all looked like ugly, wrinkly balls, if you asked him. Here and there, spots on the brains appeared darker or lighter than others, but the images were gray-scaled, so other than that, they all looked pretty much the same. But maybe if he focused really hard he'd figure out what was weird about them. Then something clanked down onto the table directly in front of Naruto, breaking his concentration. Hey, wha? Naruto yelled in frustration. It was hard enough for him to concentrate on those boring, wrinkly balls without any distractions. Your tea, dumbass, Sasuke grumbled. He rolled his eyes at his teammate's dramatic startle response before taking the seat across from Naruto on Sakura's left. Right. Thanks, Naruto grumbled back, his tone not sounding the least bit thankful. So this patient must be pretty special, huh? He asked the room at large. So what's up with his brain? Sakura sat up straighter and cleared her throat. Okay. Well, the patient is around our age and… Hold on a sec, Shikamaru interrupted and picking up one of the scans. Our age, you say? A few parts of this brain look more mature than that, he mused. So either this patient is actually older and has some sort of neurodegenerative disease, or this patient really is our age, and his brain's development is being accelerated in certain areas at an unnatural pace. Naruto peered from the scan to Shikamaru and nodded. Shit, he had absolutely no idea what the guy was talking about. But that didn't mean he couldn't act like he did. Naruto glanced up to find that Sasuke's eyes were flickering from Shikamaru to Sakura with an expression of utter confusion. Okay, good. At least I'm not the only lost one. Exactly, Sakura said, her voice catching slightly. And I think that, well, I think these particular scans here will provide some explanation, she said while nodding towards the scans closest to her. Ah, chakra scans, Shikamaru said while raising his eyebrows. What's so interesting about them? Well, Sakura started and dragging one of the scans to the middle of the table so that everyone could see it. Have a look at this dorsal view and tell me what you guys think. A huge amount of chakra is gathered in the middle, Sasuke said while frowning at the bird's eye scan. Isn't chakra normally more evenly distributed throughout a ninja's brain? Sakura nodded. You're right, she said. Now if you compare this brain scan to the one we just looked at, you'll notice that the areas with the strongest concentrations of chakra also appear to have aged the most. Show me the ventral and sagittal chakra scans, Shikamaru chimed in and nodding towards the pile. They should give us a closer look at the regions aging faster. Sure. Sakura reached for 2 more sheets in the pile. Her fingers were trembling slightly, Naruto noticed. Probably because she was sick this morning, he thought. Being the busybody she was, Naruto doubted Sakura napped after training like she said she would. Everyone stared at the images in silence. Chakra was clumped around several different areas in the middle of the brain scans, but that was all Naruto could really make of them. He peered up at the other 3 who all appeared to be in deep contemplation. Alright, he could do that too. But that damn ticking clock was distracting him and so was his burnt tongue. The stupid tea was too hot. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Shikamaru broke the silence. Alright, so if we want to get specific, that chakra is surrounding the limbic system, especially the hippocampus and amygdala, he said in a casual tone, as if people talked about such things in any normal conversation. What are those parts responsible for? Sasuke asked and glancing up curiously. Sakura jumped in. Well, they're multifunctional, really. But if we focus on basic roles, they control emotions and memory. She paused for a moment. So it seems the chakra is causing those areas to mature faster than all the others, Sakura added quietly while staring down at the images with wide eyes. I see, Sasuke answered slowly, his eyes trained on her. But why would the chakra be concentrated like that in the first place? We've studied how chakra should naturally behave in the body. So this isn't normal chakra, is it? Shikamaru shook his head. No, I suspect not, he said. In fact, if you ask me, I think this chakra has regenerative properties. It has what properties? Naruto piped up. He was trying so very hard to keep up. But it wasn't easy. He never paid attention in his academy classes, so how would he know about brain chakra or whatever? And he was getting hungry so his attention span was weakening with each passing second. Regenerative properties, Shikamaru repeated. You know, sort of like healing properties. It looks like that chakra is regenerating and enhancing parts of the brain. He chuckled to himself in amazement. I think I've read about this chakra somewhere in a modern history book. There was some famous healer who cultivated her chakra to do this. What was her name again? Senju? Darn, the name is slipping my mind. Tsunade Senju, Sasuke finished so quietly that he practically breathed it, his eyes widening with what appeared to be realization. Sakura's own jaw dropped and the pencil she'd been balancing between her fingers dropped to the table. What just got into everyone? They were all acting like they'd make some humongous discovery and Naruto barely knew what was going on at all. Tsunade Senju? Who the hell was that? There was no way he remembered anything from his modern history classes. They were so boring that he'd never been awake for more than 10 consecutive minutes in any of them. Anger bubbled in him then. Why was it that he always felt left out? Naruto glowered at his black-haired teammate across the table who was staring at Sakura like he'd never seen her before, with his mouth hanging open and his eyes wide and unblinking. Naruto was certain he knew exactly what that look on his face meant too. Sasuke was in love with her. Not only that, but Sakura was also staring at him with equal intensity, like she was trying to tell him something through her big, green eyes. So Shikamaru was right after all, Naruto reasoned, and much to his disapproval. They are dating. And even worse than that, everyone was discovering cool things in these brain images without him, acting like they were all so smart. Well, they weren't smarter than him. Naruto knew that he could find something interesting about the brains too. Hey guys, look! He called while pointing at a scan viewing the brain from the front. Did any of you notice how the brain chakra behind the forehead is making the shape of a diamond? But, much to Naruto's infuriation, no one responded. They all just turned and stared at him. Weird, huh? He added with a small chuckle. Chapter 16 Unraveling. Sakura sat up with a lurch to find herself in complete darkness. Her heart pounded as she blinked around through the pitch black, trying to gauge her surroundings. Where the hell was she? Just then a blinding flash lit up the room, followed by a thunderclap that reverberated through the wooden floorboards beneath her feet. She jumped with surprise only to calm down slightly when she caught sight of several familiar pieces of furniture, now illuminated by the lightning flash. Ah. Okay, I know this place. Apparently Sakura had fallen asleep hunched over Sasuke's wooden kitchen table amidst a stack of medical textbooks and brain scans. And she couldn't help feeling a tinge of embarrassment at the predicament. This was the first time she'd fallen asleep anywhere other than Sasuke's couch, and she was quite adamant on sticking to her non-invasive, nearly invisible routine. Sakura was aware that changes were likely to irritate her cold, sensitive teammate, so she tried her hardest to follow a rigid schedule and stay out of his hair. Not that she even wanted to be staying here in the first place. But that was another matter. Honestly, she was just relieved to find herself somewhere far away from her world of nightmares. Sakura's mind had graced her with a series of treacherous memories made fresh by recent news of the upcoming Chunin selection exams, the event that marked her previous life's downward spiral. She was plagued by thoughts of Orochimaru's infiltration of the exams, specifically, the moment he inflicted his curse mark on Sasuke. Sakura hugged her cotton pajama-clad arms and squeezed her eyes closed, trying to ignore the image of Orochimaru's scaly, white neck contorting and stretching like a snake, lunging towards her, and finding its target on Sasuke's neck, where sharp fangs plunged, and... What? A voice interrupted Sakura's train of thought. Startled, she fumbled around for the weapon pouch she normally had fastened to her thigh only to find that she wasn't wearing it. But then she registered just whose voice it was. Sasuke? She gasped and spinning towards the hallway leading to the flat owner's bedroom. And there, sure enough, Sasuke stood at the opening of the dark hallway wearing gray sweats and a black shirt and rubbing sleep out of his eyes. Crap. What was he doing up? It felt strange to encounter him outside of their usual routine. After bidding each other goodnight, Sakura usually continued reading at the kitchen table until she made her way to the couch to sleep. In the mornings, she was always long gone before Sasuke woke and never saw him again until later that day at training. She had grown used to pretending Sasuke wasn't there once he left for his room. Sakura gaped at him and became aware of the hair pressed to her face and the drool smeared on her chin. But Sasuke didn't seem to notice. "You called me," he mumbled while scratching the back of his head and blinking through the darkness in her general direction. "What is it?" "Called him?" "No, I didn't," she snapped while wiping her chin on the back of her hand. But maybe, just maybe, there was a tiny, not so improbable chance that Sakura said his name in her sleep. Her nightmare had been about him, after all. Her face flooded with color when it occurred to her just how loudly she must have said his name if her cry woke him up. Sasuke merely cocked an eyebrow in response. "Why aren't you on the couch?" he asked, ignoring her comment and nodding to the living room across the hall. I was just about to go there," she stammered and rising to her feet. "Everything is fine. I'm fine. This is so awkward." She scuttled on past him, feeling Sasuke's eyes keenly trained on her, and approached the couch to prepare it to sleep on. "Act natural, Sakura," she told herself firmly as she fluffed up the pillows and felt around for a blanket. It was a little unnerving how Sasuke was now leaning in the living room doorway with his arms folded, watching her every move with a skeptical look plastered on his face. What was he waiting for, anyways? Did he think she was up to something? Why didn't he just go back to bed? She was completely fine. Then another thunderclap resounded. Sakura jumped a foot in the air and emitted a shrill squeak. She peered nervously at her teammate who, to her disappointment, was now smirking and shaking his head. "I'm fine." "Really?" she repeated while averting her gaze and curling herself up on one side of the couch. The curtains on the floor-length window were ajar, revealing the first of the raindrops pounding on the windowpane. That was when the cushions below Sakura dipped slightly. She whipped her head around to find that Sasuke had eased onto the other side of the couch. She straightened up with surprise and pulled the blanket more tightly to her chest. She'd spent so much time alone on this couch that she'd nearly forgotten that it was Sasuke's and that he technically had every right to sit on it when he pleased. That said, Sasuke had never taken an interest in sitting on it with her. Sakura was certain that he'd been treating her differently since they looked over her brain scans with Shikamaru and Naruto the previous evening. She noticed the way his eyes darted to her forehead unusually frequently last night. Even after the other boys left, Sasuke had hovered nearer to her than he usually did, and he even offered to make food for her when her stomach growled while she perused her heap of textbooks. It was a little unnerving how fascinated he seemed by her now that he knew of her hidden abilities. What did he think she was, a shiny new toy? A weapon to polish? He didn't understand the pain this was putting her through. Sakura's life was ruined. The time travel mission was now impossible. Of course, Sasuke was the only person besides herself who was aware that those brain scans belonged to her. But, if what she'd deduced from them was true, the two of them wouldn't be the only ones to know the truth for much longer. It seemed that some of the regenerative chakra she'd been building up in her former life had survived the trip across time dimensions, and that this very chakra was speeding up her current brain's development. But what exactly was it doing to her brain? The evidence pointed towards one possible conclusion: Sakura was about to unlock the strength of 100 seal, a jutsu designed by Tsunade Senju, her former mentor, herself. As the name suggests, the jutsu taps into a monstrous chakra-enhanced reserve of physical strength, but that's not even the best part. It also gives the user an opportunity to master a regenerative and self-enhancing medical ninjutsu called Creation Rebirth, a technique that makes the user virtually indestructible, assuming they don't run out of chakra or overuse these powers. Under normal circumstances, Sakura would be ecstatic. For 3 years she'd trained tirelessly to build up her chakra and one day unlock this skill. And, as Tsunade had promised her, once she finally unlocked it, she would be the second medical ninja in Konoha's history granted full access to the front line of any battle. But there was a catch. The strength of 100 technique bears a permanent mark on its wielder. And it's not exactly an easy mark to miss: a dark, purple diamond smack dab in the middle of the user's forehead. Oh, how unprecedented that would be if a homegrown, fresh out of the academy ninja went around bearing the mark of a legendary Sannin, a mark indicating that Sakura had mastered the techniques of a woman who she had apparently never met. Her connection to Tsunade would be made as clear as day. And she had absolutely no idea how she would talk her way around it. Would she be accused of stealing the technique? Of being a spy? A reincarnation of some sort? And what about when she actually met Tsunade? How the hell would she explain herself then? Sakura sighed with frustration and rubbed her temples. What was she to do? Another bright bolt of lightning branched across the sky, pulling Sakura from her thoughts. She blinked and realized that she'd been staring dazedly at her teammate and immediately wrenched her head away. Sasuke stirred, noticing her abrupt movement. You aren't going to be sick again, are you? He asked seriously and tilting his head to face her. Sick? Really? That's what he thought this was about? No, I'm not sick, she answered quickly and watching the tree sway in the shadows outside. Sasuke leaned back into the couch, making no motion to get up and return to bed. Good, he said. I don't want you puking on my couch. After a pause, he added, what was that about yesterday morning, anyways? He too was watching the storm now, the flashes of light dancing across his dark eyes. You weren't actually sick because of food, were you? Damn. He's good. Sakura shrugged. I don't know, she lied dismissively, but he was persistent. I also doubt you don't find yourself capable of entering the Chunin exams. He didn't say anything more, deliberately prompting her to answer. She sighed. Okay. You're right, she said, nervously nibbling on her lower lip. Something happened yesterday morning. Before I met you all at the bridge. What happened? Sasuke asked. He was watching her intently. Ignoring her heartbeat echoing in her ears, she recounted the events of the previous morning. A week or two before the first exam, the participants from other villages usually start showing up to register and get settled in. And that's exactly what's happening now. There are all sorts of powerful and unusual characters prowling around Konoha as we speak. At this, Sasuke turned towards the window as if an enemy might appear. I thought I noticed strange chakra signatures throughout the day, he said thoughtfully. Yes, well. I ran into a ninja from the Sound Village yesterday who, caught my interest. So I followed him, Sakura said, closing her eyes and wincing at the memory. Sakura took a rooftop shortcut to training the previous morning, and only moments into her trek, she detected a foreign yet familiar chakra signature. She followed her senses, biting back her growing feelings of dread, and soon spotted none other than Zaku from the Sound Village. A tremor ran through Sakura's body at the sight. That morning it hadn't occurred to her just how fast approaching the Chunin exams were. And seeing Zaku here on Konoha turf was among the starkest reminders she could have received. Zaku of all people, the tall, merciless foe with wind tunnels in his palms, had pummeled Sakura to a bloody mess the last time she'd seen him. In the Chunin selection exams of her former life, in fact, it was Team 7's face-off with Zaku's team that was the first time Sasuke had succumbed to Orochimaru's newly inflicted curse. He had totally lost himself, dismantling Zaku's arms with strength lended to him by the wicked snake, and Sakura even had to physically restrain her teammate before he went on to beating Zaku's entire team to death. You followed him? Sasuke repeated with interest, impelling her to carry on with her story. Yeah, she said, nodding. I followed him to where his three-man team was training in a secluded area of the village. I stayed a safe distance away and watched them for a while. But then I got hit by one of his teammates' long-range techniques. So you're hurt? I'm fine now, she said. His teammate didn't attack me directly. If he'd hit me head-on it would have been a different story. This sound ninja, Dosu, can manipulate sound waves. I just got caught in the crossfire and it made me sick. Thanks to a quick anti-nausea medical ninjutsu, Sakura had managed the trip to the training grounds. But at Kakashi's reminder that the Chunin exams were indeed just around the corner, Sakura's emotional turmoil broke right through the ninjutsu in the form of vomit. Sakura flushed at the memory. How's that for your great world savior, Tsunade-sama? She thought with stab of humiliation while balling her trembling hands into fists. You still aren't feeling well, Sasuke determined. You should sleep. And then, as Sasuke often did when he didn't know what else to say, he stood up and motioned to leave. Just before he turned down the hallway leading to his room, he added, wandering around the village alone probably isn't a good idea now. You never know who could be out there. Sakura's heart started to pound. He had a point. All of the twisted enemies from her past would be arriving in the village at any moment. Kabuto. Gaara. Orochimaru. There was no way in hell Sakura was getting any sleep tonight. Sakura was on her way to the library. After hours of sleepless turmoil, she'd finally reached the conclusion that she would not do this alone. She could not do this alone. It was time to be realistic. Just because Sakura had special insights into the events that were soon to take place, it didn't mean she had to deal with all of their accompanying problems by herself. She was physically and mentally incapable of doing so. Even with a super brain or whatever Naruto called it, she was still only human. So, with that driving thought in mind, the following day, Sakura decided that she would skip out on training with Team 7 to gather evidence that justified the Sound Village being disqualified from the Chunin selection exams. Now, her first impulse had been to go directly to the Hokage Tower and plead with the village's High Council. But it didn't take long for the more rational side of her to recognize how stupid that would be. See, if Sakura went straight to the Hokage Tower with claims of an impending war without any proof, firstly, no one would believe her, and secondly, it would likely sound like she was the one trying to rouse conflict between seemingly allied nations. She had no authority to make such claims. Heck, she wouldn't be the least bit surprised if she were tossed in jail or a psych ward in response. Sakura settled on a trip to the library instead because, first and foremost, she needed to collect information on the Sound Village's corrupted political structure. If the Leaf Village's High Council was presented with tangible evidence of what went on within Sound's borders, surely the nature of their alliance would shift for the worse. So if everything fell into place just how Sakura hoped it would, Leaf would revoke Sound's invitation to participate in the exams. Then, without Sound's support, Sound would call off the attack on Leaf, and the exams would ensue without issue. Sakura grimaced. This plan sounded a whole lot better at 2 in the morning, she thought, but onward she strode because it was the only plan she had. Of course, it was just Sakura's luck that every single book on the Sound Village were checked out at the library. She even made a detour to the hospital's small collection of reference books, where she recalled encountering a book on the Sound Village's health policies once, only to find that it was also nowhere in sight. Sakura gritted her teeth and approached the clerk perched behind the small desk near the library exit. "Excuse me," Sakura said, and forcing a calm facade. "Could you please tell me who is checked out, She quickly glanced down at the note she scrawled from the library directory. "A guide to Otogakure healthcare policy?" The woman frowned and pushed her thick-rimmed glasses further up the bridge of her long nose. "Just a moment," she said while reaching for a hefty black binder. After a few minutes of thumbing through the pages and scanning list after list of handwritten notes, she said, "Ah, yes. Nara, Shikaku. He checked it out a month ago. In fact, it's well past its due date." She clicked her tongue and reached for a colored pen while muttering something that sounded an awful lot like, "I must have a word with him again." But Sakura hardly noticed. The culprit's surname was Nara. It was a relative of Shikamaru's, likely his father. "Thanks," she said hurriedly and circling back towards the hospital entrance. "Now I've gotta find Shikamaru." Sakura hadn't intended for this to become a scavenger hunt, but if that's what it took for her to get her hands on that book, so be it. The book must make reference to any of the major ethical violations that took place in that corrupted village, from genetic experimentation to infanticide. And with the right amount of evidence, Sakura planned to compile a list of reasons to conduct an investigation of the Sound Village, and hopefully they would find at least something fishy about. A bone-chilling scream interrupted her thoughts. Immediately, Sakura's medical ninja instincts roused, and her feet carried her through the hospital hallways towards the source of the voice. She came to an abrupt halt in the entrance of the emergency wing, where a young boy was being cradled in a man's arms. And that was just about all Sakura could process of the situation besides all of the blood. Liters of blood were spilling onto the floor and staining the boy's leg. And like a bee to honey, Sakura raced onto the scene. She beckoned for the man to set the boy down onto the ground as she reached for the leg of the boy's pants to inspect his injury, only to find that his foot was gone. That explains a lot. Mechanistically, Sakura took action right there in the hallway of the emergency wing. She tore the black band from her waist and fastened it to the boy's calf as a tourniquet in attempt to slow the blood flow. Then she reached into her medical bag, which was now splayed on the floor, and pulled out a small container of pills. "Painkillers," she said quickly, while tossing the container to the man, who she presumed was a relative of the boy's based on how he was holding back tears and clearly experiencing emotional distress. "Give him half a pill." The man nodded fervently and did as Sakura instructed. Despite Sakura's lack of medical attire, she seemed to carry enough of an authoritative demeanor for the man to trust her. And he also seemed ready to do just about anything to save the bleeding boy cradled in his arms. The procedure went smoothly. Given Sakura's experience tending to grave injuries on battlefields with nothing but her own 2 hands, this was right in her element. It took her only 20 minutes, about 10 minutes longer than it would have in her old life, to remove the dead cells, stop the bleeding, send a pulse of soothing chakra through the damaged nerves, and create a protective coating around the stump where his missing foot should be. And, as she'd rehearsed on countless occasions, she managed to engage the man in a light-hearted chat while she was casting her ninjutsu on the boy, who was losing consciousness. She learned that the man was indeed the kid's father, and that the boy was an academy student and aspiring ninja. "This won't have to be a setback," Sakura offered gently as she unwrapped her waistband from the boy's leg. "This hospital has the greatest prosthetic limb research lab across the 5 great nations. He will need intensive rehabilitation, but I have high hopes for his recovery." "You mean that?" the man said in awe, and clutching the unconscious boy more tightly against him. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have let him near the training grounds without me. I was careless." And with that, the man took a shuddering breath that Sakura recognized as an attempt to stifle a sob. Her body responded instinctively. Grabbing his hand and looking the man dead in the eye, she said in a strong, unwavering voice, "Sir, I promise you that your son will have as good a shot as he always did at being a ninja. Even without a foot, if he sets his mind to it, he can do anything, and we will support him every step of the way. He's a lucky kid to have such a responsive father who knew to take him straight to the hospital. You managed to get him here just in time." She patted the back of the man's hand affectionately and stood up. "Now, even though the wound is healed, I recommend you have a nurse clean his leg properly. We don't want him getting an infection." The man was staring at her now with wide, glossy eyes. "I will. Thank you," he said softly. Sakura nodded in response, preparing to turn away from the scene, but she was held in place by a shuffling sound behind her. She turned around and found a large crowd standing there, including several nurses holding out a stretcher, surgeons, doctors, her supervisor receptionists, and other patients who had been in the waiting room. They all appeared to be rather stunned. "Hello," Sakura said, a little awkwardly, and realizing how odd it must seem for the fresh out of the academy intern to have performed an advanced medical procedure in the middle of the hallway. She said, while turning back to the man on the ground. "Looks like there are plenty of nurses for you to ask right here." She let out a small, nervous chuckle to break the heavy silence. "Well, I have to get going. Take care." Finally, she turned towards the exit. "Wait. Doctor." The man called after her from where he was crouched on the ground. "Doctor. Can I get your name?" Her response came naturally. "I'm Sakura Haruno. But some of my patients call me the Pink Medic." She turned away again, and this time she really did exit the hospital, leaving a horde of flabbergasted medical personnel behind her. Now. Time to find Shikamaru. 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 Where on earth would she find him, anyways? Sakura hadn't the slightest idea where he lived or if Team 10 was on a mission today. And besides the library, which she had already thoroughly explored, she wasn't sure where the brainiest ninja in her year might spend his spare moments. Well, she needn't waste her time on an impossible search. Instead, she would look for someone who might know of his whereabouts. Someone who spent a lot of time with Shikamaru and who would be much easier to locate. It didn't take long for Sakura to think of just who this someone would be. After about 15 minutes of wandering the village road most heavily lined with shops, Sakura's heart leapt at the sight of the very blonde-haired kunoichi she was trying to find. Ino! She cried at the top of her lungs before she could think better of it. I'm so happy to see you. Ino, who had been twirling a strand of her long hair around a finger and gazing into a shop window, side-eyed the incoming voice. Sakura wasn't entirely certain what the status of their ever-unstable friendship was at the moment. It was only a matter of time before Sakura's loud-mouthed teammate blabbed his theories of Sasuke and Sakura's supposed relationship to anyone who would listen, and Ino had quite an ear for gossip. But this wasn't the time for such trifling matters. Sakura had a life-or-death mission to fulfill and she wasn't going to let one of Ino's jealous, dramatic hissy fits get in her way. Ino, listen, Sakura said through bated breaths as she neared said blonde. Do you have any idea where I might find Shikamaru? Forehead, Ino responded flatly. Why are you asking me? Sakura caught a note of dismissiveness in her tone and cringed with annoyance. Resisting a strong urge to raise her voice, Sakura took a deep breath and said, since you're his teammate, I figured you might have an idea. But Ino's icy, blue eyes only narrowed. It's just favor after favor with you, isn't it, forehead? She sneered. And now, if my sources are correct, you and your dunce of a teammate are trying to spread a rumor that you're dating Sasuke. Tell me, Sakura, why should I help you? Well, this is just great. There really couldn't be a more inconvenient time for drama to stir up. Sakura didn't have time for this. The village and the ninja world didn't have time for this. Ino, I'm serious. I need to find Shikamaru. This is urgent, Sakura pleaded while staring intently at her friend and clasping her hands together. I promise I didn't start any rumors. To her disappointment, however, Ino merely rolled her eyes, her rosy lips curling into sneer. I don't owe you a damn thing, Sakura. You know what all the girls have been talking about these days? Your new outfit. And who picked it out for you? Me. Who gave you a shot at a social life when we were kids? Me. And now you've got the nerve to parade around claiming that the boy who everyone is after would give you a chance. You're delusional, forehead. Delusional and pathetic. Sakura opened her mouth and closed it again while her chest tightened with an emotion she couldn't quite place. She'd forgotten just how nasty she and Ino had been to each other in their early teenage years. But they'd moved on. They made up and rekindled their friendship so that it was stronger than it had ever been. Well, in her past life, that is. When they'd grown older, the pair of them wouldn't dream of letting a boy come between their friendship. Ino helped Sakura get back on her feet after Sasuke left the village. She welcomed Sakura onto her three-man squad the second time they participated in the Chunin selection exams, and, side by side, they advanced in rank. It was Ino who took Sakura out for a drink after a traumatic or particularly stressful day at work. Or after a mission. Or to celebrate a promotion. Or just to catch up. Alright, so they went for drinks a lot, a side effect of having Tsunade for a mentor, Sakura figured. God, how Sakura missed her old friend. Her old experiences. Her old life. What I would give to go back. It was in moments like this, when it felt like her world was about to collapse, that Sakura craved a moment with someone who she could confide in, someone who truly understood her, who could keep her in check and give her advice. In this life, she didn't have anyone even remotely close to the kind of confidant she needed. Well, except for one person, but she wasn't so sure he counted. Right on cue, someone roughly tapped Sakura on the shoulder. It was more of a jab, really. She snapped her head around, her reflexes on high alert, only for her jaw to nearly hit the dirt road when she discovered who it was. Sasuke-kun? Ino squealed from somewhere behind her, but Sakura ignored the ear-piercing sound. What do you want? Sakura snarled, her eyes narrowing. Sasuke was fully clad in his ninja gear and must have just finished up at the training grounds with Naruto and Kakashi. He towered over Sakura with his dark eyes narrowed. And he really couldn't have picked a worse time to show up. Things weren't exactly going as planned with Ino, but any hope of patching up their problems was lost now that the very cause of their argument decided to show up in the flesh. Sasuke chose to ignore her question. Where have you been? He growled back while folding his arms. He wore what appeared to be an impassively cool expression that Sakura had come to recognize as a mask for inner rage. Why does that matter, Sasuke-kun? Ino butt in with a flirtatious giggle, and attempting to push her way closer to the object of her desire. Her eyelids were fluttering unnaturally frequently, and her face was tinted a pale shade of pink. But then, to Ino's surprise, Sakura nodded. Yeah. Why does it matter where I've been? She answered coldly. Anger flashed across the Uchiha's face. You didn't show up at training. I didn't know where you were, he deadpanned with a glare. Sakura felt Ino freeze beside her. This isn't good. Despite his aggressive tone, Sasuke wasn't making that fake dating scheme seem like just a rumor. And, of course, this exchange just had to be happening right in front of the third loudest ninja in the entire village, after Naruto and arguably Kiba. I have my reasons, Sakura said, her confidence wavering. Why don't you tell that to Kakashi, then? He said dismissively and grabbing Sakura's arm. She winced with surprise, and opened her mouth to retort when a new voice inquired, tell me what? Sakura spun around, and surely enough, there stood her masked sensei. Sakura really couldn't believe her horrible luck. She was in a rush now, with the Chunin selection exams fast approaching, and of course today of all days everyone was choosing to make horribly timed interruptions. Oh, Sakura started and glancing at her sensei unsurely. She still didn't quite have her head around Sasuke's recent appearance. I wanted to apologize. Crap. Now she was stuttering and sounded suspicious. In truth, she was nervous. Sakura couldn't afford for Kakashi to catch her in any more suspicious scenarios. I wanted to apologize for missing training this morning, Sakura clarified while bravely looking up at her sensei and fighting the color rising in her face. There was an emergency at the hospital. And if he doubts me, I have witnesses to back me up. Kakashi seemed unfazed. That's fine, he said with a small shrug, his hands in his pockets. I'm glad you're practicing your medical ninjutsu. Sakura was midway through a sigh of relief when he added, but I would like to have a word with you. Her stomach did a somersault. A word? About what? Miss Yamanaka, Kakashi said and turning towards Ino, who was unusually quiet. Her face was twisted into a rather bitter expression. If you don't mind, I would like to speak to my students privately. After a pause, she nodded and shot Sakura one last glare before turning on her heel and stalking off. Bye, Ino, Sakura called after her but she was blatantly ignored. Well, this was just lovely. Sakura didn't have time for any of this. What did it matter if Kakashi was angry, anyways? When the war started, it would be the last thing on any of their minds. She needed to focus on her mission. She needed to research the Sound Village. Approach the Hokage with some credible evidence. Keep Orochimaru out of the village. So, have you two eaten lunch? Kakashi asked and glancing up from the orange book he had apparently pulled out of his weapon pouch while Sakura's mind was racing. Sasuke and Sakura shook their heads in unison. Good. Come with me. Without warning, he leaped onto a nearby roof. In a flash, she and Sasuke tailed him as he bounded from rooftop to rooftop through the damp, post-storm air. As irrelevant as following Kakashi around at a time like this might be, he'd managed to pique Sakura's curiosity. Her sensei often made reference to skipping meals when they were about to engage in a particularly strenuous exercise, like the bell test. Despite everything that just happened, she was relieved that Kakashi was including Sasuke in this too. It meant he probably wasn't trying to corner her. Sakura figured he was leading them to the training grounds so that they could spar while he assessed the extent of her abilities. So when Kakashi hopped down onto one of the streets near the village outskirts, Sakura was quite surprised. It appeared he had led them to some sort of old residential complex on a road lined with ramshackle houses in need of some serious maintenance. Kakashi glanced at his students over his shoulder. "Have you been to this spot?" he asked. "No," Sakura answered, but then she noticed a large sign in her peripheral vision, which suggested that the building immediately in front of them was, in fact, a restaurant. "Oh no. He doesn't mean." "Perfect," he said with a dismissive nod. "I know the owner of this place. Just go on in and tell her you're my students. She'll give you lunch on the house." Sakura gaped at her sensei in disbelief. This had nothing to do with training at all. Kakashi, who was clearly still under the impression that she and Sasuke were in some kind of relationship, was setting them up for a date. Now this she didn't have time for. Sakura glanced at her teammate for support, but to her horror, found him removing his head protector. "Alright," he said with a shrug. And that was how Sakura ended up spending her afternoon on a date with the love of her life. A date she would do just about anything to get away from. "Come on. He's gone," she pleaded for the umpteenth time. "We can leave now." "We both know Kakashi could be anywhere," Sasuke answered between sips of water. "And I don't see what difference this makes. We both needed lunch." Sakura ogled at him with disbelief. He was trying to rationalize the date. Sasuke was. With a pang of frustration, she realized what a tragedy her life was. She'd spent years pining after this guy. If an opportunity like this came up at any other point in her life, when she was in a proper state of mind and didn't have the weight of the world on her shoulders, she would have been all over him. But, of course, that wasn't how things played out. "You're not eating." Sasuke's voice interrupted her thoughts. She blinked a few times and finally noticed the aroma of the lunch that was set down on their table while Sakura was lost in her thoughts. "Oh. Right," she said while tucking a strand of hair behind her ear and reaching for her chopsticks. Sasuke lowered his. Sakura could feel his eyes trained on her now, but she stared intently at her food. "You weren't attacked today, were you?" he asked in a hushed tone while leaning forward and placing a hand on the table between them. "No," she answered sharply. "What makes you think that? There's something wrong with you." His steady tone was laden with some sort of emotion that Sakura couldn't quite put her finger on. Pity? Concern? Sakura peered up at her teammate's face and met his expectant glare. Did he want an explanation for her mood? A play-by-play of her day? Just who does he think he is? Surely Sakura would freak him out if she admitted the things that weighed on her mind. They were training partners and good friends, and he already knew too much about her life. She needed to distract him to convince him that everything was okay. So Sakura put on her brightest of smiles and reached out to place her hand over Sasuke's. His fingers felt cold against hers. "I'm fine. Please don't worry about me," she lied, and forcing some light-heartedness into her tone. "It was a hard day at the hospital. A boy almost bled out and I'm not used to the life or death stuff." Sakura deliberately skipped a few blinks to dry her eyes out and fill her tear ducts with some moisture. "Perfect." Sasuke was glancing between their hands and her tear-filled eyes with a blank expression plastered on his face. Then he broke out into a smirk, his face relaxing. "I call bullshit," he said a little amusedly and giving her hand a squeeze. "Try again." "Crap. This would be so much easier if I was having lunch with Naruto." And to make matters worse, Sakura felt a blush creep across her cheeks, possibly because Sasuke just called her bluff, and possibly because he was still holding on to her hand with an incredibly triumphant, and attractive, smile. Damn it. So, what now? Tell him the truth? No, that definitely wasn't an option. She needed to get out of here. She would explain that she was feeling sick again or something. But just when Sakura was about to open her mouth to respond, a voice on her left caught her attention. Pink. That's her, right? Sasuke seemed to notice it too because his smile vanished and his head snapped around towards the voice, all while his grip on Sakura's hand tightened. Two unfamiliar chakra presences were approaching. And Sakura was on her feet before she got a proper look at them, dragging Sasuke up beside her. Sakura blinked at the strangers with confusion, trying to gauge who the tall, cloaked men were. You're Sakura Haruno? The taller man on the right asked calmly. He wasn't making any motion to threaten her or to entice a battle, but Sakura knew better than to let her guard down around unfamiliar ninjas. Can I help you? She said unwaveringly while squaring her shoulders. She noticed Sasuke's free hand hovering over the weapon pouch on his thigh. Excellent, said the shorter of the two men, while clapping his hands together dismissively. We'll need you to come with us now. He cast Sasuke a quick glance. It would probably be best if your boyfriend didn't follow us, he added with a broad smile. Someone's got to pay for the lunch, after all. The cheeriness in his tone wasn't sitting right with Sakura. And where, exactly, are you planning to take me? Sakura asked then, her hand instinctively balling into a fist and charging up with chakra. The Hokage Tower, he answered, for an interrogation. Chapter 17 On one condition. Sakura was the kind of person who had a natural aversion to getting in trouble. She was the type to show up at least 15 minutes early for everything, she respected her elders, and her personal goal in life was to heal people and improve their quality of life. Besides that one time she skipped taijutsu lessons to study for an upcoming history test, she was a perfect, straight-A student who hadn't broken a single rule in all of her academy years. The most deviant thing she'd ever done in her entire life, in fact, was love and chase after an S-ranked criminal. But even then, she chased him only because she believed there had to be some good left in him, somewhere. So, needless to say, it was a little out of character for Sakura to wind up in prison. Seated on a tall, metal chair, she found herself in one of the village's interrogation rooms with her arms shackled around the back of the chair and her calves strapped to its legs with tight rubber bands. The room was dark, aside from the dim, yellowish light trickling in from under the closed door on her left, which illuminated the array of torture devices lining the walls. As promised, the two cloaked men had escorted her to the Hokage Tower, but upon their arrival, took a detour down a tunnel connected to the village's prison. In all honesty, Sakura was too shocked to process how nervous she ought to be in a circumstance like this. She couldn't afford to be interrogated. Not now that a war was just around the corner. They simply couldn't find out the truth about her time travel mission at a time like this. She didn't know how she'd cope with the repercussions, let alone predict what they would be. Just then, the large wooden door creaked open. She squinted towards the opening as the light poured in, trying to determine if her interrogator had arrived. It seemed he had. The door slammed shut, soon followed by a glaring white light being flicked on and angled directly at Sakura's face. She winced and blinked into the brightness, trying to make out the silhouette of the person before her, who was easing himself down into a chair on the other side of the light. Sorry about the restraints, said a distantly familiar, male voice while she blindly scanned her surroundings. It's protocol. Her eyes finally started to adjust a little and she glimpsed long, blonde hair. The man spoke again. Ibiki Marino is the head of Konoha's torture and interrogation force, as you might be aware. But today he has other matters to attend to. So instead, I, Inoichi Yamanaka, am here in his place to have a little chat with you. That's how she recognized the voice. Yamanaka, this man was Ino's father. Sakura had never been particularly close to Mr. Yamanaka, but she certainly knew of him, given the years she'd spent playing in his yard and having slumber parties with his daughter. But they had never had a proper conversation. At first, Sakura felt a surge of relief at the sight of his familiar, blue eyes. Even though he was likely required to detach himself from all personal connections to his subjects, Inoichi said they were going to have a little chat, didn't he? That was surely a better alternative than whatever torture devices the famously militant Ibiki would have used. But then Sakura recalled the bloodline trait that the Yamanaka clan was known for mind manipulation. And all her calm thoughts drained away in a flash. "Alright, Sakura," Inoichi said while rubbing his chin and assessing a document on the wooden table in front of him. It was still quite difficult for Sakura to make out the details of his face through the piercing light. "I collected the results from the fingerprints, blood test, saliva sample, and chakra scans you did on your way in. And everything seems to match up just fine." His voice trailed away, and by the sound of the flipping papers, Sakura presumed he was reviewing her test results once more. All of those tests had been a blur to Sakura, really. At the time, her mind had been reeling through all the possible reasons why she would be interrogated in the first place. The first thought that came to mind was the hospital break-in, the night that she and Sasuke snuck into the unauthorized wing to use an MRI machine and scan her brain. Did she accidentally leave some sort of DNA sample behind? If anything, she was worried that Sasuke would end up getting caught, given the blood his arm had dripped onto the floor. Or were they caught by a security camera as they booked it out of there? Sakura just knew they had been reckless by sprinting straight past the other hospital workers. That in itself had sketchy written all over it. Or, in a worst-case scenario, did someone find the time travel scroll, currently disguised as a pair of red underwear? She'd been staying over at Sasuke's place every night for the past week, leaving her bedroom completely unattended, aside from the traps her teammate laid out and the occasional shadow clone. Could someone have taken advantage of her absence and done a little snooping in her drawers? Yes, so, your test results match up with your medical records. Although your chakra reserves appear to have grown exponentially, your chakra signature is consistent enough. Now we can move on to the questioning. Sakura heard the papers ruffle once again. "Alright, Sakura. You were born of civilian parents with no exceptional inherited skill in chakra control, correct?" "Yes," she answered with a nod. "It states in your file that you haven't a single relative with a ninja status. Now, can you please tell me what drew you to the ninja arts in the first place, particularly the medical arts?" Sakura swallowed hard, suddenly feeling uncoordinated from the intensity of the light. It would be safe for her to answer this question honestly, wouldn't it? Well, at first, I begged my parents to enroll me for the academy because all my friends were going. I didn't have many skills when I started out, but I studied hard. And it turned out I had a natural aptitude for chakra control. But I still wasn't like my friends. I didn't have a special bloodline trait or physical strength. One day I got tired of feeling so incompetent, so I decided to pick up a new hobby on the side. I knew I had the memory and work ethic for it." Her mind carried her back to when she approached Tsunade and asked to be taken under her wing. She'd been so frustrated after the years of trailing behind her teammates, of being protected, of feeling utterly useless, of watching them get hurt and sacrifice themselves for her. It was then she had realized that there was a way she could help her friends. If she wasn't capable of mastering offensive powers, then she would direct her attention elsewhere, and so her passion for healing was born. As it happened, Tsunade had some particularly powerful offensive skills to pass on to her apprentice too. "Right then," said Inoichi while jotting something down into his notes. "Do you have any affiliation with Lady Tsunade Senju, the legendary Sannin?" For a fleeting moment of sheer panic, Sakura wondered if Inoichi was reading her mind. He couldn't be, could he? Sakura didn't know the extent of the Yamanaka clan's mind control techniques, but maybe, just to be on the safe side, she would try filtering her thoughts, or even shutting them out entirely. "She's my inspiration," Sakura said, using all her effort to keep her voice from wavering. "I've studied her techniques thoroughly and I hope to be half as influential as she is one day." And that was the absolute truth. Well, minus a few rather significant details. "I see," Inoichi mused while noting something down. "Okay, now I'll fire off just a few more questions before I take you upstairs." From there on out, the questions weren't half bad. They were rather generic, in fact, they were similar to the questions Sakura would fill out in her applications for identification cards and passports. He asked her whether she'd ever moved, where she'd traveled in the past year, whether she'd experienced any serious accidents or medical crises recently, and other questions of that nature. Sakura stuck to answering the questions as she would have in her past life. Except, of course, when she was asked a question on her relationship status, which she was able to answer on behalf of both of her lives. It seemed she was meant to be single no matter what universe she was in. Excellent, Inoichi said once he was through with the questions and setting his pen down dismissively. Now, I'll see to it you're unbound. Then I will escort you to Konoha's High Council's conference room. The conference room, on the highest floor of the Hokage Tower, was a much more comfortable arrangement than the interrogation room had been. By a long shot. Sakura found herself sitting on a dark brown leather couch facing a group of council members sitting along a table on a risen platform. Although she would take this over the prison any day, the room had an unnaturally constricting feel to it. The high ceilings made it too spacious. The lack of windows made the air too still. And the way all the council members were facing her made Sakura feel like the real test was just beginning. She paused to take in the faces before her. The only person she knew was Sarutobi, Konoha's Hokage, who was seated in the middle. He was adorned in his long, white, Hokage robes and matching headdress, under which his aging face and beady eyes were directed at one of the other council members. She vaguely recognized the other three members from formal events and important executive meetings she'd attended with Tsunade on occasion. To Sarutobi's right, according to the placeholders, sat Hamura Mitokado and Koharu Udatane, and to his left sat a grim-looking man with short, dark hair named Danzo Shimura. Danzo. Now that name rang a bell. Sakura couldn't quite put her finger on the context in which she knew it, but she suspected that Tsunade's many complaints about how the council members were trying to ruin her fun were likely sources. Why so tense, Ms. Haruno? The Hokage asked as a tiny smile graced his lips. Make yourself comfortable and we'll begin. Sakura leaned back a couple of inches, attempting to unstiffen a little, but she kept her mouth firmly shut. What was the old man playing at? Did he think this was a joke, or was this a strategy of some sort to soften her up so she'd be more willing to disclose information about herself? Then again, when Sakura thought about it, Ino's father really hadn't put on the hard-ass interrogator persona she'd expected either. What kind of tactics were these? Right, well. We've called you here to discuss a particularly unusual situation that has been brought to our attention, said the Hokage while lacing his fingers together and resting his elbows on the table. I have a special interest in your medical expertise. It's unprecedented, you know, for someone your age to have mastered such elite skills. I suppose it is, Sakura said, her tone rather flat. It was taking a huge portion of her concentration to keep her voice from catching. This wasn't it? This was where her mission got exposed to the council members, and then eventually, to the entire village. And what would become of her then, when people found out she was from the future? Well, they'd never treat her normally, that was for certain. And surely it wouldn't be kept a secret either, meaning that she was likely to die. Tsunade had explicitly told her, on the night she sent Sakura back in time, that if word of her connection to the time travel scroll got into the wrong hands, she could be killed for it. Wait. The double doors on the wall behind Sakura were thrown open. She spun around to find Iam, her supervisor at the hospital, come bursting into the conference room. A pair of Jonin security guards were lingering by the doorway, who Sakura presumed had unlocked the doors for her. I hope I haven't missed anything, said a breathless Iam as she approached the couch, her brown hair twisted into a messy bun on top of her head. She had apparently discarded her white coat, but she was still wearing green scrubs from work. You are just in time. Please have a seat next to Ms. Haruno, Sarutobi said kindly. Danzo didn't seem to share the same sentiments. It was you who called for this meeting, wasn't it? He asked, the corners of his mouth twisting into a frown. What is the purpose of all this? Sakura froze. You. She breathed, and swiveling around to face her supervisor, who was now perched on the couch. Sakura couldn't believe it. Iam was the one onto her. All this time she'd come off as so genuine and supportive, but, as Sakura had learned throughout her ninja career, those qualities didn't make a person any less dangerous. But how did I catch her? Sakura must have slipped up somehow at the hospital. Perhaps during the hospital break-in. Or maybe it was earlier today, when she was healing the boy in the emergency wing. Or maybe the bloody strength of 100 seal was already visible on her forehead. Great. Why didn't she ever listen to Ino about the importance of keeping a compact mirror on her at all times? Yes. I said before turning to look at Sakura sheepishly. I'm terribly sorry I didn't warn you beforehand. But we really don't have time to waste. And I don't care how old you are or what world you came from, I need you. The village needs you. Sakura's mind was racing. What the hell was going on? You said that her resemblance to Tsunade is as clear as day, is it? Chimed in Koharu, who was eyeing Sakura through dark, narrowed eyes. It is. And there's no mistaking it. I said, and Sakura couldn't understand why she sounded so positively thrilled. Did she really want her in turn to get prosecuted that badly? She works with such professionalism and precision that we'd be out of our minds not to promote her. Wait. What? Sarutobi heaved a long sigh. As I told you earlier, he said, shaking his head. We simply can't have a genin serve on a board, let alone practice as a licensed doctor. It's unheard of and could be damaging for the reputation of Konoha's medical system's governing body. But, sir. I pleaded, leaning so far forwards on the couch that she might tumble off. I must insist. I don't know where she learned it from, but just today, Sakura conducted an advanced procedure all by herself, and followed our hospital's protocol to a T. Please, sir, we are understaffed. Couldn't you give her a chance? Sakura's heart was drumming in her ears. With a stab of guilt, she realized that hadn't set her up for a punitive interrogation. No, it was just the opposite, wasn't it? Wanted to promote Sakura, despite her young age and low ninja status. And the predicament was so unheard of that she needed to consult the High Council. Was that really what all this was about? Was Anoichi's interrogation nothing but a security clearance? And not about her time travel mission after all? Don't you find it just a little unusual that someone so young and talented would turn up now, right when you need her? Drawled Danzo as he rubbed his thumb and forefinger along his chin. Sakura's sigh of relief got caught in her throat. A little, Sarutobi agreed thoughtfully while surveying her over his laced fingers. And let us not forget how her abilities have been relatively dormant until very recently, it seems. But she cleared Anoichi's assessment, interjected Hamura while leafing through the sheets of paper before him. He didn't detect anything unusual in her medical evaluation. But what if Sakura were a chunin? Added who seemed to be struggling to stay seated. Would you feel more comfortable with promoting Sakura if she were of higher rank? Sakura stared wide-eyed at her supervisor. For the first time, it dawned on her that she recognized She was certain now that an older version of this woman had been working under her in her former life. And here she was, defending Sakura before the High Council like her life depended on it. Sakura decided that when she got out of this mess, she would buy the biggest bouquet of flowers she could get her hands on. And if, somehow, she ever went back to her old life, she would award the woman with a promotion of her own. Said Sarutobi, while raising an eyebrow. Weren't you invited to participate in this year's exams, Ms. Haruno? Yes, she somehow managed to get out despite the dryness in her throat. He paused for a moment before turning to catch the eyes of the other elders. They all seemed to be communicating something through their stares. Sakura's watched in earnest, her mind whirling in and out of focus. Sarutobi finally turned back and spoke again. What do you say to that, Sakura? Granted you pass your medical exams, if you also graduate to Chunin, you may work as a licensed medical ninja and take a position on the hospital's governing board. Now, I don't mean for this to offend you, of course, but it would reflect poorly on the village to assign a genin such a prominent position. And your participation in the exams would be a perfect opportunity for us to carefully observe the extent of these advanced abilities you apparently possess. Sakura was frozen. Was this really happening? She glanced at who was beaming at her and nodding encouragingly. And Sakura truly wanted to share the enthusiasm. Desperately, even. What a relief it was that she wasn't going to be tortured or thrown in jail. On the contrary, she was being handed just the job she needed on a silver platter. More than anything else, she wanted to simply accept the offer, stand up and shout yes, and run straight to the academy to submit her Chunin exams application. But the cards Sakura were dealt didn't allow for her to simply do anything. No, she found herself saying, before she could stop herself. I'm afraid I must decline. Unless you can meet a condition. Although her voice was steady, she was feeling very small under the scrutinizing gazes. A condition? Sarutobi repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly. The others were watching her with expressions of utter bewilderment. But Sakura forced herself to ignore them. Because now is my only chance. Now that they might see her as a reputable young prodigy, she felt it was time to tell them what she had been meaning to tell them since that morning. And when the words slipped out, it felt like an out-of-body experience, like someone else entirely was speaking them. The Sound Village must be thrown out of the exams. It seemed the High Council members weren't the gasping types. But during the horrible bone-chilling silence that followed her request, Sakura actually wished they were. Why is that? Danzo asked calmly, but there was an edge in his voice that made the back of Sakura's neck prickle uncomfortably. You do realize that the registration deadline is today, Sakura, Sarutobi said. The Sound Village participants are already in our village. The first exam is tomorrow morning. Shit. Tomorrow morning? So soon? Well, never mind that. There was no going back now that she'd thrust her outrageous-sounding claim on them. I've done some research, you see, she said, and resting her hands on her kneecaps to steady them. And the Sound Village isn't really a village. In fact, it's a giant laboratory composed of various hideouts and bases scattered throughout the land. Her voice started to trail off a little as she scanned the sea of watchful eyes. Were any of them taking her seriously? Go on, prompted Koharu. All right. At least some of them were willing to hear her out. Sakura inhaled sharply. The village was founded by Orochimaru, former teammate of my hero, Tsunade Senju. He created the village with the sole purpose of collecting ninjas for his deranged personal experiments. So you're claiming, said Hamura slowly, that the Sound Village endorses human trafficking and human experimentation? Yes, Sakura said with a fervent nod. How do you know all this? Asked Sarutobi, who was now exchanging a weary look with Danzo. Like I said, I've done my research, she responded honestly. I've spent a lot of time reading books on Tsunade-sama and her former teammates. The medical practices in the Sound Village caught my interest, and ever since I learned about them, I've been terrified of the place and the ninjas who come from there. It was no lie that Sakura has spent a significant amount of her previous life reading books on Sound Village corruption. But she wasn't even sure if all of those books had been written yet in this life. Sakura prayed they didn't ask her to produce a reference list. The High Council members were all exchanging meaningful glances and inaudible whispers, but Sakura couldn't tell if any of them were in her favor. Her heart was still hammering against her chest and her fists were clenched so tightly that her knuckles were white. But if she didn't get the Sound Village out of the exams, Konoha was in danger. And if these council members didn't believe her now, she didn't know what she would do. Finally, Sarutobi turned his attention back to the couch. I appreciate the disclosure of your concerns, he said. But this proposition is extreme, given the circumstances. The Chunin selection exams serve to strengthen the relationships between the allied nations. It would be rash of us to break that promise, regardless of whether your claims are true. The other council members nodded silently at his side. Oh no, oh no. He was declining. They were all declining. Now they probably thought she was a lunatic. And if the Hokage and the village elders weren't going to help her stop this war, she would have to stop it herself. But she hadn't the slightest idea where to begin. Could it hurt to conduct a brief investigation? A new voice emerged from behind Sakura, near the doorway, giving her a start. She hadn't even noticed the new presence enter the room. She spun around, and when she caught sight of the new arrival, her already heightened nerves went into overdrive. It was Kakashi. Sensei. She choked out and feeling her hands tremble. What are you doing here? Kakashi abandoned his position of leaning on the doorframe and sauntered towards the couch with a hand in his pocket. His exposed eye was staring icily at the high council table, ignoring Sakura entirely. I'm here to find out why no one bothered to tell me that my student was brought before the high council. He was greeted by silence, and Sakura noticed I shrink back further into the couch. Are you suggesting I can't take care of my students? He asked casually, though his voice was laced with a sinister undertone. No, of course not, Kakashi, the Hokage answered at once while lowering his hands to place them on the desk. The anger in Kakashi's eyes seemed to subside then, but still held a firmness that only an idiot might dare cross. Someone like Naruto, Sakura thought with an untimely urge to chuckle. Good, he said dismissively. Now, if you don't mind, I will escort Sakura to the academy so she can register for the Chunin selection exams with her teammates. Wait, sensei, Sakura said and getting to her feet. I can't, Kakashi finally turned to look at her. His visible dark eye looked tired. It's out of your hands now, Sakura, he said, shrugging. If what I've concluded from this situation here is true, you were summoned simply to prove that you are, indeed, a prodigy, a fact which I strongly attest to. He paused, his eyes slowly returning to the council members. It would be foolish to pretend we haven't always had our suspicions about the Sound Village. And if I've learned anything since I became Sakura's teacher, it's that she has a knack for making seemingly irrational decisions that, almost always, end up being right. The room was silenced. And Sakura was flabbergasted. Let's go, he said. And that was how a rather delirious Sakura wound up strolling along the village streets with her teacher after being dismissed from prison and the High Council's conference room. She hadn't a clue what to say to him now. Surprisingly, Kakashi seemed to believe her far-fetched proposal. Considering his high reputation in the village, having his confidence might end up saving her ass. But, why did he believe her? I take it that you trust me, sensei? Sakura asked, breaking the long silence and shooting him a hesitant sideways glance. Do I have a reason not to? He answered without peeling his eyes from the road. You're a smart kid. It would be foolish of me to pretend I haven't noticed something unusual about you. Sakura gulped and anxiously waited for him to elaborate. You seem to have predictive abilities that don't always make much sense in the moment, but that tend to keep Team 7 out of danger. I have my hunches about what's going on with you, and I don't think you mean to cause any trouble. So as long as you prioritize the squad, I will trust you. His visible eye shifted in her direction. Inexplicably, Sakura had urged to cry. Since Sakura's parents were civilians, Kakashi really had become something of a parent figure through her years as a young ninja. Having his trust, at least to some extent, felt like a piece of her she hadn't even known was missing had been returned. Nevertheless, Kakashi admitted that he found her unusual. He probably knew more about her predicament than he was letting on, but at least there was hope that they might forge some sort of relationship again. Thank you, Sakura stammered, but there was so much more that she wished she could say. Kakashi merely shrugged in response. Well, you'd better hurry on in there, he said, and nodding towards the academy doors, which Sakura hadn't realized they'd arrived at. The boys have been complaining about your absence all afternoon, so please go find them and save me an earful. Sakura's stomach gave an uncomfortable lurch. Because she couldn't register for the exams, not yet. But, Kakashi-sensei, I can't. What about the Sound Village? She said hurriedly, her mind bubbling with panic. The Chunin exams weren't any safer to take now than they were before. But, to her surprise, Kakashi outstretched a hand towards her and ruffled her hair affectionately. Sakura's body seized at the familiar gesture. We'll just have to wait and see. Sprinting pell-mell through the crowded hallways, and after what felt like an eternity, Sakura finally caught sight of just the individual she was looking for. Naruto. Sasuke. Wait. she cried, while pushing her way through a small crowd of grass ninjas. At the sound of their names, both boys whirled around. Sakura-chan. Naruto bellowed back and putting his hands on his hips. Where the hell have you been? We just found out that we can only register in teams of 3. And, honestly, if you hadn't turned up in 5 more minutes, I would have forged your signature and registered you myself. Believe it, he added with a pout. But you haven't registered yet, have you? She asked between heavy breaths and hunching forwards to rest her hands on her bent knees. Not yet, Sasuke answered while folding his arms and staring down at her through narrowed eyes. And not until you've explained what happened back there. After the restaurant. Sakura exhaled deeply and straightened up. Right. He deserved an update on why their mock date was interrupted so mysteriously. Also, if I can stall them long enough, we might miss the registration deadline altogether. Wait, what restaurant? Naruto interjected and glaring suspiciously at his teammates. Why wasn't I invited? Sasuke rolled his eyes. But out of this, dumbass, he snapped. But such comments tended to have the opposite effect on the feisty, blonde ninja. If my teammates are going to keep sneaking off to make out, it sure as hell is my business. He boomed and drawing the attention of nearby groups. As unlikely as this might sound, one day on a mission, I might need help from you, Sasuke. And if you keep getting sidetracked, my life could be put on the line. Onlookers were actually pausing to listen in on the heated exchange now. Sasuke's eyebrow was distinctly twitching as his face flooded with color, probably due to some mixture of rage and embarrassment. Naruto, you're dead, Sasuke growled. Sakura, on the other hand, was hardly paying attention. She cast a quick glance at her pocket watch to discover that they only had to kill about 2 more minutes. That was when an automated voice broke out over the intercom system. May I have your attention please, rang out the voice, after a few seconds of static and high-pitched ringing. Sakura jumped. She certainly didn't remember anything remotely close to this happening in her old life. This year's Chunin selection exams have been delayed by 1 week. I repeat, this year's Chunin selection exam have been delayed by 1 week. The registration deadline, however, has not changed. If you still need to register, please do so immediately. Thank you. And then with another fizzle of static, the voice disappeared and the chattering around them resumed. Sakura's heart just about stopped. The exams were delayed? Could it honestly be that the High Council members listened to her and Kakashi after all? Were they going through with a Sound Village investigation? Sakura was suddenly overcome with a giddy excitement that she hadn't felt in years. Maybe things were, in fact, against all odds, going to work out in her favor. Maybe, just maybe, the Sound Village would be thrown out, and the exams would be made safe. And how nice would it be for her to unleash the full extent of her new powers, to actually achieve a Chunin status this time around, and get the promotion at the hospital she was entitled to. Boys. Sakura announced as she latched herself onto their arms. Weren't you both listening? We have to register immediately. Hurry up. Chapter 18, A Small Omission. Sensei, can I please speak to you for a moment? In private? Kakashi lazily tilted his head to catch his student's gaze. You can, he said simply, and Sakura knew she had his attention then. I have a favor to ask you. If it isn't much trouble, she said, carefully selecting her words. She wasn't sure if she was overstepping some sort of boundary in their newly revamped relationship. If she asked too much of him now, would he be willing to help her out when she was in a pinch in the future? Well, there was one way to find out. And Sakura could think of no bigger pinch to be in. He was looking at her expectantly. Kakashi-sensei. What do you say to conducting one-on-one training sessions for the Chunin exams? After a silent moment, he shrugged and turned his head back towards the orange book in his hands. I'm not opposed to it, he said nonchalantly. What would you like to work on? Sakura gulped and let her eyes drift towards the training grounds before them, where her teammates were currently sparring. Naruto's army of clones was forming a circle around Sasuke, who was crouched in a defensive stance. Sakura's eyes lingered on the Uchiha for a moment before she willed herself to speak again. Not me. I want you to train him, she said, and nodding towards her black-haired teammate. He was now roundhouse kicking Naruto's swarm of doppelgangers. Kakashi followed her gaze and raised his eyebrows. Why is that? He asked. Her brow furrowed. She was unsure of the best way to go about this. Well, I think he has an affinity for using the lightning element, like yourself. He could probably learn a lot from you. After a pause, Kakashi closed his eyes and leaned back against the tree trunk behind him as a cool breeze swept past. All of Naruto's clones were gone now, and the original Naruto was charging at Sasuke head-on with his balled fists flailing. What's the real reason? Kakashi asked casually without opening his eyes. Sasuke is my most talented student. He doesn't need the extra help. Sakura frowned. He was right, of course. But how could she convey her worries without letting on just how much danger her teammate was in? I just think that he's desirable. He's the only person left with Konoha's most prestigious bloodline. Don't you think he'll be targeted for it? She looked on at the battle for a moment. Sasuke had blocked Naruto's attack and was now on the offensive, aiming a series of strikes at Naruto's pressure points. I don't know. I just think a little extra defense could only do him good, she added. Right then, Naruto managed to get a hold of Sasuke's wrist, and with a mighty growl, pulled Sasuke into the air and attempted to flip him over and ram him into the ground. But Sasuke read Naruto's intentions too quickly. Just in time, he locked his feet around one of Naruto's ankles and kicked sharply, causing the blonde to lose his balance, loosen his grip, and land right on top of Sasuke. You have a point, I guess, Kakashi said slowly while he watched the boys flail around on the ground in an angry heap as distant cries of "let go," "get off," and "too close" resounded through the grounds. You sure this isn't just an overworried girlfriend talking? Sakura felt heat rise in her face. She'd nearly forgotten that Kakashi was still under the false impression that they were in a relationship. No, she said quietly and staring determinedly at the ground and puzzling over why his comment was making her feel so tongue-tied. She wasn't overworried. This was about stopping a war and saving the world. She was far from an overworried girlfriend. She wasn't his girlfriend at all. God. Calm down, Sakura. Naruto and Sasuke were scrambling to their feet now, both looking disheveled and profoundly disturbed. Kakashi-sensei. Naruto called over. I really hope it's lunchtime because I can't train with this lunatic anymore. Stole the words right out of my mouth, Sasuke grumbled at his side while rubbing the dirt off his face with the back of his hand. Kakashi chuckled to himself. I'll see what I can do, he said to Sakura before snapping his book closed and addressing the boys. Good timing. I was just getting hungry myself. The next 2 days weren't easy for Sakura. Not with all the confusion surrounding the Chunin selection exams bouncing around in her mind. The exams were delayed for 1 week. But why? The only logical explanation she could muster up was that the High Council members actually took heed of her concerns now that Kakashi was backing her up. If that was the case, they were likely conducting an investigation of the Sound Village, and if all went as planned, Sound might be thrown out of the exams entirely. But now that Sakura really thought it through, what were the odds of that happening anyways? The Sound Village probably kept their deranged practices hidden well under the radar. Realistically, in anticipation of circumstances just like this one, Orochimaru probably set things up to appear like a normal, functional village. And his experiments, she presumed, were likely conducted in the shadows. So would Konoha's investigators even find anything there, if they were even there at all? Sakura had way more questions than answers, and they were plaguing her endlessly. Aside from waiting around, there was absolutely nothing else she could do that wouldn't get her A, in trouble, B, killed, C, thrown in a psych ward, or D, mistrusted by the villagers. She somehow managed to carry on with her regular routines for a couple of days, albeit her preoccupied thoughts She partook in mindless D-ranked missions with her team in the mornings, went to work at the hospital in the afternoons, spent the evenings with her family or practicing her medical techniques in her bedroom, slipped out to the training grounds with Sasuke at night, and crashed on his couch after sending a shadow clone home to stay in her bedroom. Throughout the course of those days, however, she didn't speak much or display her usual feisty air. None of it mattered anymore, not her job, her relationships, or even her training. What did any of it matter if she failed to stop the war? The exact same chain of disasters were bound to happen and her entire mission would be for naught. As time passed by, she became acutely aware of the unfamiliar chakra signatures looming around in the village. She tried with all her power not to imagine the kind of characters that were prowling the streets, trapped here for an extra week because of her, particularly Orochimaru and his cronies. Surely this delay was doing wonders for Konoha's economy, but it was taking one hell of a toll on Sakura's nerves. Late afternoon on the second day after the interrogation, following a pleasantly challenging shift at the hospital, Sakura grew the courage to enter the threshold of the flower shop. During her hospital shift that day, Ayam let Sakura into the operating room, even though she probably wasn't supposed to, during the removal of a tumor on an elderly man's lung. Sakura was assigned the role of distributing equipment to the surgeons, but she wound up giving them directions and conducting informal quality control assessments. The whole ordeal was quite rewarding and proved to be a wonderful networking opportunity. All of that to say, Sakura was feeling rather guilty over having doubted her kind, thoughtful supervisor's loyalty. At the very least, she felt she owed Ayam a gift of some sort, something like a bouquet of flowers. When Sakura entered the flower shop, she was graced by an icy stare from her ever-emotional blonde friend, or maybe it was ex-friend at this point. She had no idea if Inoichi, Ino's father, had shared any information about Sakura's interrogation with his family. It didn't seem like Sakura would find out either, since Ino determinedly ignored her as she browsed through the rows upon rows of flower arrangements. After several minutes of browsing in silence, Sakura assembled a small bouquet of pink carnations, a flower which she vaguely recalled having some symbolic meaning for gratitude, and hesitantly approached the cash. "I'll take these, please," she said after clearing her throat to catch the platinum blonde's attention. Ino, who had been filling out some inventory forms, shifted over to the cash without sparing Sakura a glance. "No need to guess who these are for, is there?" she sneered as she punched something into the register. "They're for my supervisor," Sakura answered flatly. Ino shot Sakura a disbelieving glare but said nothing more. She charged Sakura the full price and after paying, Sakura bolted out of there without another word. The bitter tension was driving her insane, and the last thing she needed was exposure to another stressor to push her over the edge. It sucked that their friendship was crumbling to pieces, but the village walls would soon be too if Sakura immersed herself in petty drama at a time like this. Her friendship with Ino just might have to be sacrificed for the greater good. The rest of her afternoon was relatively ordinary up until dinner. Sakura took her usual seat at the table as her mother served the food and her father sauntered in from the sitting room. But then Sakura's mother looked up from the steaming pot of rice in her hands and said something rather unexpected. "So, we had a little chat with your sensei today, Sakura," Mabuki began as she set the pot down on a hot plate. "He told us what's been going on with you over the past few days. And I must say that I'm a little surprised, to say the least." Sakura's stomach dropped. Her mother simply couldn't be talking about the interrogation, could she? If Sakura's parents found out that she was getting involved in village politics, they were sure to have a barrage of questions for her. And, frankly, Sakura would rather be sent back to prison for more questioning than try explaining this mess to her parents. "I'm not impressed that you're leaving us in the dark," chimed in Kazashi as he eased himself down at the head of the table. "I get you're not home much, but we at least expect you to tell us about the big stuff in your life." Sakura was going to kill her sensei. As if she didn't have enough to worry about at the moment, now her parents were being dragged into the chaos. Why the hell hadn't Kakashi warned her he was going to spill the beans to her family? "What did he say?" she asked carefully while scooping vegetables onto her plate. Mabuki sat down across from Sakura. Well, he told us about the restaurant situation, she said while casting her daughter a pointed look, her green eyes flashing. But I really wish I'd heard about it from you. You're our only child, Sakura, quipped Kizashi while shaking his head disapprovingly. Kizashi was a large, rather imposing man for a civilian. He could be intimidating when he wanted to be. And we can't support you if you don't tell us a thing. I'm sorry, Sakura mumbled while bowing her head in dismay. I should have told you everything right away. She hated disappointing her parents. They were huge supports in her life. Their agreement to enroll her in the ninja academy despite their hopes for her to take a different, and less dangerous, career path showcased as much. Damn right you should have, Mabuki huffed, her tone softening slightly. So, when is he coming over for dinner? Sakura paused. Dinner, for what? Who? Kakashi-sensei? Sakura asked while lifting an eyebrow. Then, much to her confusion, her parents burst into laughter. Well, I certainly hope not, said Kizashi while slapping one of his hands onto the table. That would complicate things. Would it ever? Mabuki agreed while covering her mouth to stifle a chuckle. Okay. What the hell is going on? After several excruciatingly long seconds, Sakura's parents finally came to grips with themselves. That young Uchiha fellow, I thought. What's his name? Asked Kizashi before turning to his wife. Sasuke. How many times have I told you? Mabuki snapped. Anyways, Sakura, I know you think we're both too old to understand these things, but believe me, we've been there. Entering the world of dating can be stressful and we are here to help. Well. This conversation is taking a mighty fast turn. Thanks, Sakura said unsurely as it dawned on her that this wasn't about the interrogation at all. We want you to make a good impression. It's not every day you come across a young man from a prestigious clan, after all, Mabuki said with a determined nod. But let's not judge a book by its cover, am I right? We need to see if he's suitable for you, added Kizashi. Invite the guy over for dinner this weekend. Yes. I'll do that. Sakura really was going to kill her sensei. Sakura finally felt a glimmer of hope about her life early on the third morning after the interrogation. She was changing out of her pajamas in Sasuke's living room after a long night's sleep on his couch when she noticed a carrier hawk land outside the window with a small scroll fastened to its leg. Out of courtesy, she pulled on her training gear and went out to meet the large, brown bird and take in Sasuke's mail for him. She threw open the doors and was greeted by the glare of the bright morning sun and a chilly breeze. Rubbing her hands along her bare arms, Sakura approached the hawk, but froze in her tracks when she caught sight of the scroll clasped in its talons. The scroll was a deep shade of red embroidered with golden leaves, Konoha's emblem. As Sakura had learned over the years of living in Konoha, scrolls adorned with that color combination were used for important announcements from festival invitations to warnings of natural disasters and ambushes. Naturally, Sakura's attention was piqued. She slowly returned to the living room with the scroll in hand. A scroll just like this must have been sent to my parents' place too, right? So it can't hurt if I take a quick peek, even if this one is addressed to Sasuke. If the village was under attack, she reasoned, the sooner she found out, the better. So without further ado, Sakura wrenched the scroll open. Inside it was a short message written in inky, slanted letters. Attention Chunin Selection Exams participants. Enrollment details for the upcoming Chunin Selection exams have been amended. A total of 153 genin from Konohagakure, Sunagakure, Amigakure, Kusagakure, Takigakure, and Kirigakure will participate. The first exam begins on Monday at 9 a.m. sharp. If you are late, your team is subject to disqualification. Ibiki Marino. Sakura was frozen in place. Wait. Did she read that right? She skimmed the letter again. Otogakure wasn't there. The Sound Village wasn't participating? Her heart was hammering in her chest. Am I reading this right? Is this some sort of trick? Sakura desperately needed a second opinion. Before she could think better of it, Sakura found herself flying down the hallway to Sasuke's bedroom with the unraveled scroll in hand. Sasuke! She gasped as she slammed open his bedroom door without any regard for the fact that he was probably sleeping. Sasuke bolted upright, a kunai in hand and Sharingan activated. Looks like I'm not the only one with jumpy reflexes. What the hell, he started, but Sakura interrupted him. I need you to read this for me, she said while briskly striding over to his bedside and inwardly praising the gods he appeared to sleep mostly clothed while he was home. That certainly saved them from some unneeded awkwardness. He swiveled around to sit on the edge of his bed, keeping his eyes trained on her the entire time. He deactivated his Sharingan once she sat next to him, but he was still poised for a counter-attack if the situation called for it. It was only when Sakura had eased onto the mattress did the repercussions of her actions dawn on her. Sasuke's body heat and scent filled the dimly lit room and he wasn't wearing anything but a pair of navy boxers and a t-shirt. She'd never been in Sasuke's bedroom before. Is that a picture of Team 7 right on his bedside table? Nor had she ever done something quite so bold. And a book? Does he read before bed, in his presence? Considering her teammates' intolerance for invasions of his personal space, surely Sasuke's reaction to this would be an unpleasant one. Focus. That doesn't matter right now. Right, Sakura needed to get back to the letter. Casting aside all interfering thoughts, she thrust the scroll into Sasuke's hands and beckoned for him to read it. You went through my mail, he commented as he scanned the letter. Yes, well. That's not the point, she said hurriedly. Is Otogakure listed as a participating village? When he finished reading, he slowly said, no. Why? Sakura inhaled sharply. There had been an investigation after all. And the Sound Village had failed it. Which meant that the exams were safe. The village was safe. Sakura's promotion was safe. Sasuke was safe. This was all too much to take in. Sakura was on her feet in an instant with a surge of adrenaline. No reason. She beamed while Sasuke ogled at her with confusion. Water collected in her tear ducts when her eyes met his. He'll be fine this time, she thought, and throwing her arms around him with such force that he nearly toppled backwards onto the bed. Sakura. He grumbled against the front of her shirt. But his voice was muffled and Sakura barely heard him. Her energy levels were through the roof. She needed to move. When she released Sasuke and motioned to leave, he caught her hand just in time. Where are you going? He demanded, his expression serious though he was evidently baffled by the unexpected hug. It's time to start the day. She answered sweetly while carefully prying her hand free. And then, without backwards glance, she booked it out of his room. Sakura. What's going on? Was the last thing she heard before she raced right through Sasuke's front door, laughing, and with a skip in her stride.